It was just like any other day when I was called over by my mother-in-law, Hilda, to cut the grass at her house. Nadia is such a nuisance, isn't she? I had just moved to the backyard when I overheard Hilda and my husband, Daniel, talking through the open skylight in the living room. Yay, but everyone at the office sees her as competent, and she's Dad's favorite. She really has no charm at all. I'd be happy if I never had to see her face again. Neither of them seemed to notice me in the backyard, absorbed as they were in their fun of bad-mouthing me. Having lost my parents early, I grew up alone, raised in an orphanage. Daniel, the son of the company's president, accepted me and my background with no hesitation, and we got married. Family is something incredibly special to me, especially as someone who grew up in an institution. I thought I had finally found a place where I truly belonged. But my mind went blank, and I was frozen in place. To make matters worse, it seemed Daniel had a mistress with Hilda's approval. As I listened to their crude laughter, my legs began to lose strength. Just as I sank down onto the ground, I sensed someone behind me. I turned weakly, and there stood my father-in-law, Calvin. He took the sickle from my hands, grinning wickedly. "So, shall we cut off their heads then?" 3 days later. My name is Nadia Thompson. When I was young, my parents divorced, and it was just me and my mom from then on. But when I was in elementary school, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. By the time they discovered it, it had already spread throughout her body, and all they could do was palliative care. She passed away in less than 6 months, with no relatives willing to take me in. I ended up alone and was placed in an orphanage where I was raised. I left the facility and started living on my own right after graduating high school, eventually getting a job at a certain company. It was a family-run business with about 100 employees, led by the president, his wife, and their son, Daniel. From the time I joined, I was often praised for my work. The orphanage had raised me with the motto "Take care of yourself," which naturally instilled a sense of self-discipline, perseverance, and independence in me. The materials you put together, Nadia, are so clear and user-friendly. Even our clients loved it. Thank you. That makes me happy. If you'd like, maybe we could go out for a meal sometime. We got closer after a project we worked on together. And soon enough, Daniel and I started dating, eventually leading to marriage. Nadia is really diligent. She works fast and never makes mistakes. A client just complimented her abilities the other day, and I couldn't be prouder. I know I can trust her to support Daniel as well. My father-in-law, Calvin, fortunately seemed to like me. He watched over my relationship and marriage to Daniel warmly. However, the journey to marriage was not all smooth sailing. My mother-in-law, Hilda, was vehemently against our marriage. Nadia, as Daniel's fiancée, she grew up in an orphanage with no parents and only a high school diploma. How shameful! You're the son of the company president, Daniel. Why would you choose someone like her to be the daughter-in-law of this family? When Daniel proposed and informed Hilda of our engagement, she pointed straight at me as she said this, even though I was right there. "And you? Are you trying to seduce our Daniel to take over the company just because you're all alone? Wasn't that your plan from the start?" She didn't hold back when speaking to me, either. Nadia would never think that way. People praise her work ethic. Her background doesn't matter. Dad always says the same thing, doesn't he? That's right, Hilda. It's not about someone's education or upbringing. We need to see who they are at their core. Nadia is sincere, hardworking, and genuine. And by marrying her, Daniel will grow as a person, maybe more than ever before. In the end, Daniel and Calvin managed to persuade Hilda, who reluctantly agreed to the marriage. After getting married, Daniel and I rented an apartment close to my in-laws. I decided to continue working at the company even after our wedding. Having been alone for so long, I finally felt like I'd found a place to belong, and I truly enjoyed my work. I think I'll be late tonight, Daniel. What about you? Me too. How about we grab dinner out together? In the early days of our marriage, I felt a simple joy in just living with Daniel. Having a family member to come home to, being able to say good morning to someone, and having the luxury of lounging around together, laughing and joking, it was all incredibly special for me, someone who had grown up in an institution. But that happiness didn't last long. Hilda's interference grew more intense. Nadia, after work tomorrow, come by our house and pick up a package. I'm busy, unlike you. This Saturday, an important guest is coming over. Prepare something for them. Don't make it like the bland stew you made before. Learn to cook properly like we do in this family. Hilda frequently summoned me to her house, assigning me tasks, and never failing to add a small insult each time. Because of her last-minute demands, I couldn't make plans outside of work, and I gradually lost touch with the friends I'd stayed close with since leaving the institution. Hilda, I actually have plans that day. It would really help if you could let me know in advance. One day, I tried to tell her, oh, poor you. I guess without parents, no one taught you any manners. When you're married, you have to do what the family says. Didn't they teach you that at the orphanage? Don't worry, as a Thompson daughter-in-law, I'll make sure you're properly trained. She frequently tied everything back to my lack of parents and my upbringing in an orphanage, using it as a basis for her jabs. I had never felt ashamed of either. I barely remembered my parents' divorce, so it didn't make me sad. After that, it was just my mom and me. She worked hard to ensure I didn't suffer and gave me all the love she could. While losing my mom was indeed painful, I've come to terms with it over time. Growing up in an orphanage wasn't a traumatic or humiliating experience for me, either. In fact, the teachers and friends I met there are like my second family. They gave me a lot of love and support, and I hold deep gratitude for them. Don't insult my family. There were times when I wanted to shout, but the words never came out. I felt that arguing back wouldn't change anything. I couldn't expect Hilda's values and prejudices to shift just because of a few words from me. Also, considering my position at the company, I couldn't just respond emotionally here. What's more, all of her harassment took place when Calvin wasn't around. As president of the company, Calvin was often busy and frequently away from home, so he likely had no idea about the treatment I was receiving. Daniel, about your mom. I tried to talk to him about Hilda a few times. Mom probably just wants what's best for you, Nadia. You know we're a family-run business, right? It's a hassle if family issues spill over into the company. As the daughter-in-law, you should know how to go along with things. Daniel had no intention of listening to me. His lack of concern for his troubled wife only added to my distress. Yet, memories of the kinder Daniel kept coming back. For so long, I'd never had the courage to share my upbringing with anyone, fearing they'd see me as a burden. But when I mustered the strength to open up to Daniel about not having parents and growing up in an institution, he accepted it so easily, without hesitation. Oh, I see. That's why you're so strong, Nadia. That's amazing. Unlike the pity or apologies I'd received before, comments like "you've been through so much" or "I'm sorry for asking," Daniel's words felt different. No one had ever praised me for it before. His response truly moved me. and I felt that I could finally be part of real family with him. Remembering this, I repeatedly encouraged myself to stay positive, but gradually, Daniel started coming home later, and he increasingly found excuses to go out even on weekends. I didn't work on the management side of the company, but apparently, Daniel had started helping Hilda with that part. Using this as an excuse, Hilda continued to pile on tasks every day. I found myself coming home to a dark, empty house, eating alone, and going to bed alone. This was nothing like the family I had dreamed of. The thought of divorce began to creep into my mind. But if I divorced, I couldn't stay at the company. This place I'd finally gained a company and a family to belong to was far more than just a workplace or family to me. The idea of losing it all and being alone again forced me to push that thought out of my head. Then a turning point came on a sweltering summer day. "Nadia, Mom wants you to come over now. Let's go." Once again, Hilda had suddenly called me over on a weekend. That day, the temperature reached a scorching 35 degrees Celsius. The sun was so intense that just standing outside made me sweat all over. Calling me out on a day like this was just too much. Thinking this, I went with Daniel to his parents' house. Even the short walk left me drenched in sweat. When we rang the doorbell, Hilda opened a door. "Hello. Welcome. It must be hot out there, huh? Daniel, you're sweating so much. I've got some cold tea ready for you. Come on in." Though Hilda seemed to be welcoming us, her gaze never once met mine, instead focusing solely on Daniel. "Where's Dad today?" "Calvin left early this morning, said he had work." "Oh, I see. The house feels so nice and cool." As I followed Daniel into the entryway, Hilda blocked my path. "Oh, Nadia, the weeds in our garden have gotten so overgrown. It's just unsightly. A messy yard reflects poorly on the whole house, you know. So I'd like you to pull the weeds now." I looked at the weeds sprawling across the yard, feeling dismayed. Although I'd noticed the overgrown weeds before, recent rains had made them even more lush than usual. Still, I knew from past experience that there was no room to refuse. If I said anything, I'd just be met with more snide remarks, and in the end, I'd have to do it anyway. Better to just comply from the start. "All right," I replied weakly, making my way toward the garden. "I'm sure you understand, but of course there's no lawnmowers. It'd be a nuisance if it disturbed the neighbors. And that engine noise is just too loud. There are some old work gloves and a sickle by the door. I expect you to be finished by evening." With a malicious glint in her eyes, Hilda pointed to the worn-out gloves and sickle sitting outside the door. "Oh, and by the way, Daniel and I have an important work meeting to attend to. It's not something a mere employee like you should overhear. So don't come inside until I call for you." With that, Hilda slammed the door with a satisfied smile. Letting out a small sigh, I reluctantly stepped into the garden, feeling the heat from the ground scorching my skin. I crouched down, put on the gloves, and began pulling the weeds with the small sickle. Sweat clung to my back and forehead, the oppressive heat making it hard to breathe. My thirst intensified, but I felt as if Hilda's eyes were on me, so I hesitated to stop and get some water. As the heat began to blur my vision, I continued working. Moving toward the backyard, I heard Hilda and Daniel's voices through an open skylight. "Nadia is such a nuisance, isn't she?" I froze, my heart pounding. I'd heard countless snide remarks before, but the explicit word nuisance cut deeply into my heart. Despite everything, I couldn't help but hold a sliver of hope for Daniel's response, but it was quickly shattered. "Yeah, she might be praised at the company, but here, at home, she's just a burden. She butts into everything I do." and it's really starting to get on my nerves. At the company, Daniel often boasted about being the CEO's son, but he wasn't exactly known for his competence, often taking credit for others' work. I was probably the only one who dared to point this out, mentioning it lightly at home. She's getting cocky just because she's capable at work. Our clients and everyone else are always complimenting her because she's a woman. See, that's why I was against the marriage from the start. I guess it's because she grew up without parents in an institution. She's just so greedy. She doesn't have a single ounce of respect for us. Exactly. But since Dad is so fond of her, I can't say much. She's such a hassle. Instead of stopping Hilda, Daniel joined in with more insults, and their complaints escalated. Finally, they went so far as to say something utterly shocking. I just don't understand why Calvin likes Nadia so much. Could they be having an affair or something? Oh, that's rough. She even butts into my work from time to time at home. You know, women need to have some charm. Just seeing Nadia's face at home makes me sigh. She really is such an unappealing girl. If I had one wish, it'd be to never see her face again. Unaware of my presence in the backyard, the two continued their gossip, seemingly enjoying it. I was frozen in place, unable to move. Though I didn't want to hear any more, it was as if my feet were rooted to the ground, and their words pierced my heart without mercy. To be honest, I'd sensed that things hadn't been going well between Daniel and me lately, and there was a growing distance between us. We hardly spent time together at home, and even when we did, there was no enjoyable conversation. Still, I had thought that work was work, and private life was separate. I believed he at least respected my work. The shock of hearing myself dismissed as full of herself, just a woman, Dad's favorite, hit hard. My mind went blank. But the next words brought me sharply back to reality. I wish I could just be with Tracy already. If I'd met her a little sooner, I never would have married Nadia. Oh, absolutely, I'd welcome Tracy with open arms. It's rare to find someone so sweet and cute. The mention of a woman I'd never heard of made me involuntarily gasp. From their conversation, it seemed clear that Daniel was having an affair with someone named Tracy. Not only that, but Hildy also seemed to know this woman well, and even doted on her. When I become CEO, I'll divorce Nadia and kick her out of the company. Then I'll marry Tracy. That's a great idea. Calvin's getting on in years anyway. Maybe just a few more years, right? Listening to their vulgar laughter as they excitedly envisioned their ideal future, I felt my legs give way. I couldn't tell if it was from the shock or the heat, but I suddenly collapsed onto the ground. Just then, I sensed someone behind me. Weakly, I turned around and saw Calvin standing there. Calvin. At my words, he quickly handed me a sports drink he was holding. Are you all right, Nadia? I'm sorry. I've been here for a while, but I didn't realize you were at your limit. The chilled sports drink soothed my parched throat and body. As I calmed down, I felt my strength returning to my legs, realizing with relief that it hadn't been heat stroke after all. I came back because I forgot something. When I saw you waiting in this heat, I was about to tell you, no need to do this on such a hot day. But then I heard Daniel and Hilda's voices, so I stayed and listened. Oh, I see. They said all kinds of things. I'm so embarrassed. What if Calvin, like the other two, thought of me as a nuisance? The fear kept me from looking at his face. However, Calvin took the sickle from my hand and gave me a playful smile. If they're going to talk like that, should we just cut them down? Calvin joked, sliding the sickle in front of his neck in a mock motion. Anyway, Nadia, I think it's time you knew. Let's move somewhere more private. Encouraged by Calvin, I followed him to his car parked in front of the house. The car's air conditioning was a welcome relief, and I felt myself come back to life. Inside, Calvin confided in me about certain matters. I was surprised, but Calvin continued and made a suggestion. What, me? Honestly, I felt confused. No, I'm asking you because you're Nadia. I've been considering this for a while. Calvin looked at me with unwavering eyes, the same man who had always believed in me. Torn, I eventually agreed to his proposal, thinking that this might be my chance to repay him. Following his plan, he drove me home so I could pack my things, and then moved me into a weekly rental apartment Calvin had arranged. After settling into the room, I took a deep breath. Then my phone rang, displaying the name Daniel Thompson. Expecting his call, I slid my finger across the screen with a bit of tension. Hey, Nadia, where the hell are you? Daniel sounded irritated. In the background, wandering off somewhere, I could faintly hear Hilda mutter, I can't tell you right now. Huh? What kind of nerve does it take to just leave without a word? You haven't even finished weeding the yard, have you? Mom is furious. How irresponsible can you be? You're a failure as a daughter-in-law. Daniel's anger came through loud and clear, but I had already decided what I would say next. Daniel, let's get a divorce. For the first time, I voiced the words that had crossed my mind countless times over the past few months. Huh, divorce? What are you talking about? Daniel's tone shifted from anger to evident anxiety. Just what I said. I've been considering it for quite some time now. Why? Why are you so angry, Nadia? This is just one of those usual marital spats, isn't it? Work's been busy lately, and maybe I've been a little distant, but I'm sorry, okay? Please, think this over. Just an hour earlier, Daniel had been so eager to divorce me when talking with Hilda, but now he was desperately against it. There was a reason behind his sudden change of heart. The conversation I'd had with Calvin in the car came back to me. The truth is, Nadia, I'm getting on in years, and I'm thinking of passing the CEO position to someone else in a few years. Really, I was surprised. Though Calvin had turned 60 a few years ago, he still looked young, and I had assumed he'd remain as president for a while longer. My first choice is, of course, my son Daniel, but as you know, Daniel's work performance leaves much to be desired. I have my own doubts about handing the company over to him, and there's already murmuring among the staff. So I propose that if he keeps his wife, a highly capable Nadia, as his assistant, then I'd consider stepping down. That's the condition I set. I see. While I was glad to have my work recognized, my feelings were also mixed. If Daniel and I divorced, I would likely have to leave the company. This meant that for Daniel to become president, he would have to maintain our marriage until that time. His sudden flood of apologies felt painfully insincere. By the way, Daniel, you're cheating, aren't you? What? I could tell he was caught off guard. I know everything. Explain it all. Hey, I'm sorry, okay. It was just a moment of weakness. I'm not serious about her. Tracy is really just a fling. Daniel began babbling excuses. The woman he was seeing, Tracy, was a much younger esthetician he'd met at a bar he frequented. In his position as the president's son, he believed himself untouchable and had seen her as he pleased, even during work hours. Apparently, Hilda knew about Tracy as well and approved of their relationship. They'd even gone shopping and traveling together, the three of them. Unlike me, Tracy was skilled at flattery, and Hilda seemed to adore her. But the one I truly love is you, Nadia. Believe me. Surely you're not serious about divorce, are you? Daniel seemed genuinely shocked that I would be the one bringing up divorce. He had underestimated me, thinking that someone as solitary as myself wouldn't willingly let go of family. Indeed, family was special to me, but I had been ignored by Daniel in every way. Worked to exhaustion by Hilda as if I were a servant. Was I here as an employee? As a wife? What was I staying here for? If this was a place where I had to cling on just to stay, then I didn't need it anymore. Nothing you say will change anything. Let's get a divorce. Nadia, cool down. You're just overheated. It's making you say crazy things. I could hear Daniel still talking, but I cut the call. Calvin had suggested that I take a couple of days off work, so for the first time in ages, I allowed myself to relax and enjoy a day off. I opened the curtains to see a blue sky, with trees swaying and their leaves rustling in the breeze. Usually, the intense sun would make me feel irritated, but with this weight lifted, everything looked different. No more fearing sudden calls from Hilda. No more walking on eggshells to avoid upsetting Daniel. It had been so long since I felt this kind of relief. On a whim, I decided to go out somewhere. In recent years, my schedule had been filled with errands for my in-laws, leaving no time for my own plans. As I shopped and caught a movie for myself, it felt like I was stepping into a new world, breaking free from the shell that had confined me. And 2 days later, I went to work as usual. Nadia, where are you right now? If you apologize, I'll forgive you. Have you cooled off a bit and come to your senses? Even though I had so clearly told him I wanted a divorce, Daniel still seemed convinced that I would swallow my pride and come back to him. But I knew what was about to happen next. Ignoring Daniel, I focused on catching up on my work. Then, in the early afternoon, I made my way to the meeting room, as planned. The quiet corridor heightened the tension in the air. When I stopped in front of the door, I noticed my hand trembling just a bit. Today, everything would finally be resolved. While most of me felt joy and anticipation for the future, a small part of me wondered if this was really the right decision. Taking a deep breath, then another, I still couldn't calm my racing heart. My fingertips, now a bit sweaty, wrapped around the cold doorknob. I can do this. Murmuring quietly to myself, I opened the door. Sorry to interrupt. In the center of the small meeting room was a large oval table, around which several executives were already seated. Naturally, Calvin, Hilda, and Daniel were among them. Nadia, sorry to pull you away from your work. I think everyone will be here shortly, so please take a seat over there, Calvin said gently, gesturing to a seat opposite Hilda and Daniel. I sat down as instructed, looking down to avoid meeting their gazes. Clenching my fists on my lap, I steeled myself. If I looked away now, I'd be the same as before. Today, I'm going to change. Encouraging myself, I lifted my head, straightened my back, and looked directly at them. For a moment, the two seemed surprised, but they quickly exchanged whispers, then looked over at me with smug smirks. Soon the other executives gathered, and the meeting began. I appreciate everyone coming to this unscheduled meeting, Calvin said as he stood, drawing everyone's attention. I have an announcement regarding personnel changes. Usually, these decisions are made collectively in these meetings, but for certain reasons, I've decided this one personally as the company president. Now I'll read it out. With those words, Calvin pulled a white envelope from the breast pocket of his suit. Seeing this, Daniel and Hilda's faces seemed to relax slightly, as if they were anticipating an announcement about Daniel becoming the next president. However, Calvin's next words were the complete opposite of what they expected. Daniel Thompson, Hilda Thompson, I am terminating both of you. The atmosphere in the conference room froze in an instant. Daniel and Hilda were paralyzed, as though they'd lost the ability to speak. But Daniel quickly stood up, storming over to Calvin in fury. "Dad, what the hell is going on?" Calvin remained calm. "I'm not finished. Sit down." Reluctantly, Daniel sat back down, looking like he had more to say. "And Nadia Thompson, I am appointing you as vice president." I could feel everyone's eyes on me. "What is this nonsense? I don't understand. Explain yourself," Hilda shouted. "That's right. Why is Nadia becoming vice president while we're being fired?" "This has to be a mistake," Daniel added, his face turning red as he argued. But Calvin's decision was clearly unshakable. "Nadia, did you somehow seduce Calvin, making a little nobody like you vice president? This is ridiculous." Hilda looked like she was ready to leap across the table and attack me, but the long table and the other executives in their seats kept her in check. Calvin must have anticipated this. I couldn't help but feel a hint of admiration for his foresight, even in this tense moment. "Hilda, don't make a spectacle of yourself here." "Stop it," Calvin said, his usually gentle voice carrying a firm and commanding tone. Hilda looked shocked, her face suggesting she had plenty to say, but she fell silent. "I will now explain the reasons behind these decisions," Calvin continued. "First, regarding the terminations of Daniel Thompson and Hilda Thompson. After a thorough investigation, it was found that both of you had been embezzling company funds. We have the evidence." A murmur of shock rippled through the conference room. "As you all know, these two are my wife and son. However, I have set aside personal feelings for the sake of the company and made this decision as its president. As for Nadia Thompson, I believe her capabilities are well known not only to everyone in this room, but also throughout the entire company. With the departure of two executives, I anticipate some unease among our staff. Nadia's integrity, the trust she's built with her colleagues and partners, and her dedicated work ethic are invaluable to this company. I hope she will lead us forward from here." The room fell into a profound silence. Everyone's gaze was on me. This silence felt like it stretched on forever. Although I had known this announcement was coming, being in the moment, an overwhelming mix of nervousness and uncertainty washed over me. At that moment, I heard the slow sound of someone clapping. First, it was one person, then another. Soon, the other executives joined in, and as the applause grew, my anxiety and fears slowly melted away, replaced by a warm, comforting feeling. "Nadia, we trust you. We're looking forward to what you'll bring." I heard a voice call out from somewhere. "Thank you very much. I'll do my very best," I said, standing up and bowing deeply, fighting to keep my voice steady. In truth, when I met with Calvin at my in-laws' house 3 days prior, he'd initially said he was there because he'd forgotten something. But as it turned out, he had returned to confront Daniel and Hildy about the embezzlement. And if their reaction was unsatisfactory, he intended to take action. It was then that Calvin witnessed their harassment of me for the first time and saw their true colors, making him disgusted with them. During my 2-day leave, Calvin had prepared everything and used today's meeting to announce their termination. Well, that concludes today's emergency board meeting. Thank you all for your attention, Calvin said, bowing slightly. The executives rose and began filing out of the room one by one. Daniel and Hilda stayed behind, desperately pleading with Calvin. "Calvin, there's an explanation for this. Please hear us out," Hilda begged. "Dad, I'll pay it all back. Just give me another chance," Daniel added, his tone frantic. But Calvin's expression remained unmoved. "This company runs on trust. You betrayed that trust, And regardless of the reasons or whether you repay the money, those are the facts. You are no longer employees here. Leave now." Calvin's steady tone made it clear that any further arguments were futile, and defeated, they mumbled something as they shuffled out of the room. Only Calvin and I were left in the conference room. "It's all over now, isn't it, Calvin?" I said softly. "Yes, Nadia, I imagine you'll go through with the divorce from Daniel. I'll need to consider my own next steps as well. Either way, it's clear that we're no longer family. However, that doesn't change the fact that you're a valuable member of this company. I consider all my employees family. Let's keep moving forward together." "Yes, sir. I look forward to working with you," I replied with a smile. Shortly after, Daniel and I finalized our divorce. I thought there might be some complications, but Daniel actually seemed eager to expedite the process. I filed for compensation from both him and his mistress, and I heard that Calvin had also divorced Hilda. As for the embezzled funds, Calvin decided not to press charges as long as they reimbursed the money, which was taken from Hilda's share of their assets. A few months later, the compensation was promptly paid, and I was free from any connection to Daniel. My days as vice president kept me busy, yet fulfilled. Then one day, I received a call from Calvin, telling me that Daniel and Hilda had shown up at the company. I rushed to the conference room, wondering what business they could have now after months of silence. Inside the room, there was no sign of the president, but instead, standing there were Daniel and Hilda, looking utterly unrecognizable from their former selves. Once they were always well-dressed in designer clothes and accessories, as befitting the family of a CEO and company executives. But now they stood in shabby, worn-out clothes, looking disheveled and exhausted. Daniel's hair and beard were unkempt, while Hilda's hair was streaked with gray, her complexion pale. Both wore wrinkled, threadbare clothes that clung loosely to their frames. I was so shocked by their appearance that I could barely process the situation. Suddenly, Daniel approached me, bowing deeply in apology. "Nadia, please forgive me. I'm begging you." What happened?" Well, as he explained, it became clear. After the divorce, Daniel had rushed to marry his mistress, Tracy. He had agreed to the divorce and the compensation payments quickly, wanting to prove his commitment to her by cutting all ties with me. Tracy, who worked as an esthetician, had suggested they open a spa together, telling him, "With your experience as a company executive, you'd make a great manager. I already have esthetician friends who've successfully expanded their own salons. We'll make money in no time and could even go nationwide. But I need to finish a few things before we marry, and we'll need startup capital." Lured by her promises, Daniel and Hilda handed over all the money they had left from their asset division to Tracy for the business. Soon after, she disappeared without a trace. When they finally went to the police, they discovered that Tracy was a notorious marriage con artist. Though they filed a report, they hadn't recovered any of the money. Now left destitute, they had come to the company in desperation, seeking help. Even after hearing their story, I felt no pity or sympathy. All I could think was that they had reaped what they sowed. As I stayed silent, Hilda approached me as well, trying to appeal to me with her pleas. "Nadia, I'm so sorry for everything I put you through. I always thought you were amazing, truly. I'll recognize you as a member of the Thompson family, so please consider reconciling with Daniel. Let's become family again, and if you could just ask Calvin to reinstate us. Please, Nadia," Daniel added. "Let's give this another chance. We can come together as the Thompson family and make this company thrive." I couldn't believe how conveniently they could change their tune. No, I can't forgive either of you. I reject any idea of reconciliation or re-employment. I firmly refused them, but they only grew more agitated, raising their voices even louder. "Why, Nadia?" Daniel shouted, grabbing my shoulder and shaking me forcefully. Just as I was about to call security, the door swung open. "What is going on here?" Calvin's voice boomed as he entered. "Coming back here now. You need to leave immediately. You're no longer family, employees, or anything else to us. If you keep causing trouble, I'll call the police and we can still file embezzlement charges against you as well." His voice was low but firm, laced with a restrained fury. Intimidated by Calvin's commanding tone, Daniel and Hilda, thoroughly defeated, hurried out of the room. Later, I heard through the grapevine that Daniel and Hilda were living together in a small, dilapidated apartment, barely making ends meet with part-time jobs. Despite their past entitlement and arrogance, they struggled with their new roles, causing their managers no end of trouble. It seemed they were at risk of being fired from even these jobs, living a very precarious and unstable life. Some of the employees mentioned seeing them once. The stress of their lifestyle had only added to their disheveled appearance, leaving no trace of who they once were. As for me, tomorrow I'll be meeting with the executive director from our client's company. "Nadia, could you join us?" "Yes, I'd be happy to accompany you." "Great. He always has nice things to say about you. Oh, by the way, I reviewed the materials you prepared for the upcoming project. They look fantastic." "Thank you. It's a big project, so everyone is fully committed to it." Though Calvin and I were no longer family, we developed a strong and respectful relationship as colleagues. In my role as vice president, I supported him, helping to lead the company to new heights. A few years later, I've decided to step down as president at the end of this term. Calvin announced one day. The founder and longtime supporter of the company was finally ready to retire. For the next president, I'd like Nadia to take on the role. What does everyone think? Though I was initially surprised at the nomination, the board unanimously supported me. I know how much Nadia has dedicated herself to this company and her vision for the future. I believe she'll guide us to the next stage," Calvin said confidently. "I am deeply honored. Thank you." As the meeting concluded, Calvin placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You'll do great," he said, and his words etched themselves firmly into my heart. In my personal life, I reconnected with my siblings from the orphanage. We'd started to meet regularly for meals, and even went on trips together. Even after all those years apart, whenever we were together, it felt just like old times. We joked and laughed as if no time had passed. No matter where we were or how far we were from each other, I felt deeply that we were truly family. At last, I'd found a place of security and belonging, and I was living fulfilling days, both professionally and personally.
Tomorrow is my brother's funeral, but my husband Joseph said he wouldn't come. Moreover, he even bragged that the barbecue with his colleagues was more important than the funeral. "Make sure the house is clean and stock up on beer and snacks for tomorrow," he ordered me, but I had already gone back to my parents' house to prepare for the funeral, so I ignored him. The next morning, the phone rang loudly. "Today is the day my colleagues are coming over. Get back here right now. Don't forget the beer and snacks." That unreasonable call came from Joseph. I sighed deeply and replied, "Got it." Then I explained the situation, left the funeral, and rushed to the house still in my morning attire. As soon as they saw me, his colleagues were astonished. Immediately, Joseph faced their criticism. "My name is Amanda. I'm currently 30 years old and work in an office. I got married at 27, and Joseph had asked me to focus solely on the house once we were married. I had always dreamed of quitting my job when I got married, so I readily agreed and left my company to become a housewife. At first, I dedicated myself to housework from morning till night for Joseph, who worked outside. Joseph also praised my efforts at home. "Amanda, it's great to have you at home. I get to eat warm meals and the house is always clean. This is the life I've always dreamed of." Joseph had grown up in a dual-income household and craved the warmth of a home. His mom worked night shifts, so they had a life of constant missed connections. He wasn't particularly close to his dad either, so he moved out after graduating high school and getting a job. Someone should always be at home. Seeing Joseph's happy face every day made me want to do my best for him. But that life didn't last long. Shortly after we got married, we built a big house and bought a car, taking on a huge loan. "No matter how many times I look over the budget, we're going to go bankrupt like this. I think I should at least get a part-time job." Joseph had asked me to quit and be a housewife, so I did without much thought, but I started feeling it was too soon. Wanting a more comfortable life, I suggested I get a part-time job. "What? Are you saying my income alone isn't enough? Sorry for the low salary. You should try saving more." I casually suggested taking on a part-time job, but it only made him angrier. I tried to explain that I didn't mean it that way, but Joseph's anger didn't subside. "Why do I only get one piece of toast for breakfast from you, a housewife? You can't even manage a proper breakfast because you're not a morning person and you think you can handle a part-time job? If you start working part-time, dinner will quickly become frozen meals. And don't even start talking about sharing household chores equally just because we're a dual-income couple. I'm not doing any housework." I wouldn't say that, and I won't slack off. Joseph compared me to his in-laws. Joseph's mom had a night job and was probably too busy to make Joseph a proper meal. I tried to reassure Joseph to ease his worries. "Don't worry, I won't slack off on the housework. Plus, if I work, it will reduce your burden too, and we'll both have an easier time." Joseph thought for a moment and then said, "All right, you can go part-time after you can handle all the housework perfectly. But make sure you save money while doing it." I agreed to his conditions, and our life together started anew with a fresh mindset. Joseph became more meticulous than ever. "Hey, the mirror is dirty. You'd be a burden if you went out to work like this." Any small mistake would result in him calling me over for a lecture. Each time, I apologized and tried my best not to repeat the mistake. "Hey, I just said to save money, not to make crappy meals." Joseph's tone grew harsher, and he began to be more aggressive towards me. "I'm sorry. I'll be more careful. And could you please speak a little more kindly?" I wanted the kind Joseph from before to return. But my plea backfired. "Huh? You're the one who wanted to go part-time, and now you're complaining about how I'm checking up on you? Are you saying you don't want to go part-time after all? How irresponsible." "No, that's not it. I just want you to be more mindful of how you say things." I was frustrated that I couldn't convey my feelings to Joseph. "Never mind, forget it." Joseph must be tired from work and didn't have the patience to listen to me. I decided to talk about it again another day. "If you have something to say, just say it clearly. Don't talk about wanting to work and then behave like a spoiled kid." Joseph scratched his head and ordered, "Anyway, we're out of beer. Go buy 3 more bottles. The supermarket should still be open." "Wait, we agreed on 1 bottle a day. If I buy more now, we won't be saving any money." I was in charge of managing the household finances and thought we couldn't afford to buy that much beer. Joseph became visibly upset.
Huh? Are you saying we can't afford it because my earnings are too low? You just need to get better at saving money.
As he pushed me out the door, urging me to hurry and buy the beer, I reluctantly decided to go to the supermarket. From that point on, Joseph seemed to believe that if he ordered me around in a commanding tone, I would obey without question, and his demeanor became increasingly harsh.
Hey!
He eventually stopped calling me by my name altogether. He probably forgot that I had started working part-time, keeping track of my paychecks. I found myself having to cater to Joseph's moods every day. During this time, I received a call from my parents. It was news that my brother Stephen had passed away.
No way! Stephen?
My parents, sobbing, begged me to come home immediately. Since it was the middle of the day on a weekday, I called Joseph, but he didn't answer because he was at work. So I left a note and prepared dinner for the evening before leaving the house. When I arrived at the hospital they had mentioned, I rushed to my parents' side and saw Stephen resting peacefully on the bed. In that moment, tears streamed down my face. The reality of Stephen's death hit me all at once, and I cried with my parents. Soon after, we met with the funeral director and began making arrangements for Stephen's wake and funeral. As night fell, we decided to return to my parents' house to rest and prepare for the funeral the next day. When I went back to my room to rest and checked my mobile phone, I found numerous missed calls from Joseph. Joseph had known Stephen, and I was sure he was in disbelief. I assumed Joseph would attend the funeral, so I prepared the details and called him back.
Hello, Joseph?
Did you see the note I left? I spoke in a voice meant to offer comfort, expecting him to be either shocked or crying. To my surprise, he was furious.
Hey! What's that all about?
I thought he was turning his grief into anger, trying to cope. I gently responded. Yes, I know it's sudden and shocking. I'm still trying to process it all myself. Before I could finish, Joseph interrupted me.
What do you mean, you'll be gone for 2 or 3 days? You better come home every day to do the chores. What?
I was stunned by his words. Despite my disbelief and being overwhelmed by Stephen's death, I told Joseph he must come and then ended the call. However, Joseph did not attend the wake. To avoid worrying my parents, I lied and said Joseph was busy but would come to the funeral. Yet, after the wake, he called and said something outrageous.
Tomorrow, I promised my coworkers we'd have a barbecue in the afternoon. How am I supposed to invite them to a dirty house? Get back here and clean now. What?
Tomorrow is Stephen's funeral. You didn't come to the wake, so please attend the funeral. I was shocked that Joseph ignored what I had written in the note about the funeral. When I mentioned the funeral, Joseph sighed.
Really? Building relationships with my coworkers is more important. You're living off me, so you should prioritize household duties over everything. If you don't, I won't be able to advance in my career. Make sure the house is clean and have beer and snacks ready by morning.
Without offering any words of sympathy for my loss, Joseph hung up, only thinking of himself. I was deeply disappointed in Joseph's coldness. There was nothing more important to me than Stephen's funeral. I decided to ignore Joseph's orders and did not return home. The next day, I attended the funeral from the morning. My phone kept ringing with calls from Joseph. But I continued to ignore them and focused on mourning Stephen. Then, one of my relatives called out to me. She said my phone had been ringing non-stop in my bag, and I should answer it. Everyone else chimed in, urging me to pick up the call. So, reluctantly, I answered the phone. Right away, Joseph started yelling.
Hey! What are you doing? Today's the day your coworkers are coming over. I know, but I'm at a funeral right now. Can you handle it yourself?
I pleaded with Joseph to take care of it himself. But he wouldn't listen and insisted that I handle it. I couldn't understand why I should prioritize house chores over the funeral. It made no sense to me.
Forget the funeral and come home now to prepare the snacks. And don't forget to buy beer.
This argument would continue until I finally agreed. Sighing in frustration, I agreed. All right. Then, with a voice full of exasperation, Joseph said,
For heaven's sake, I've got coworkers waiting here. You should have just said that from the beginning.
He hung up the phone. His tone made it seem like I was the one being unreasonable, and his selfishness infuriated me. But I pushed my frustration aside and returned to the funeral. I saw that the preparations for the cremation were starting. The staff mentioned it would take about 2 hours, giving me some time. I decided to use this time to rush over to Joseph. Sorry, Mom. I have to go to Joseph's place for a bit. I'll be right back. She asked me what the urgent matter was. I didn't lie and told her the truth. Joseph is having a barbecue with his coworkers and told me to get beer and snacks. I asked him to go himself, but he wouldn't listen. I told him Stephen's funeral is more important, but he said this barbecue is. Mom was furious, and Dad, who was listening next to her, was also angry.
Amanda, is that true?
Dad asked, his fists trembling with anger. It's true. I have to go buy beer and take it to Joseph, so I'm leaving now. With that, I left the funeral. Without time to change, I ran to the supermarket in my morning attire to buy beer and snacks, then headed home. When I arrived, Joseph was leisurely sitting in a chair, having his coworkers grill the meat. You're late. We're out of beer, and the snacks are gone. It's a disaster. Apologize to these guys for making this barbecue so dull. Say you're sorry for making it so boring. He demanded an apology.
I'm sorry for being late.
I deeply apologized to his coworkers. Then Joseph stood beside me and said,
Sorry. My wife Amanda is really useless. She'll get more snacks ready in no time.
He made fun of me, calling me incompetent, but his coworkers were all silent. Not getting the reaction he expected, Joseph said,
What's wrong? Is it because the beer isn't your favorite brand? No, it's not that.
One of his coworkers looked at my outfit and asked,
Amanda, is that what I think it is?
He pointed at my clothes. I immediately answered the question, slightly looking down. Oh, today is my brother Stephen's funeral. We're still holding the service, but Joseph asked me to run an errand. So I left in the middle to buy this. Sorry, I didn't have time to change. When I answered, my colleagues started buzzing. Then, one of them urged Joseph to attend the funeral.
Hey, why didn't you tell us something so important? We'll handle the cleanup. You go to the funeral.
It was a perfectly reasonable response. But despite the consideration of my colleagues, Joseph made a statement that left everyone stunned.
No. Building relationships with the living is more important than a funeral.
When he said that, my colleagues looked at him with disbelief. It seemed they thought it was useless to talk to Joseph, so they apologized on his behalf.
Amanda, we're so sorry. We had no idea about your situation and used your house for a barbecue without permission. We'll clean up and leave right away, so please return to the funeral. What? No. It's not a big deal if Amanda doesn't attend the funeral. Besides, we'll clean up the house quickly and have a drink together this evening.
Joseph dismissed the funeral as something insignificant, and my colleagues looked at him with puzzled expressions. Joseph, completely oblivious to their reactions, ordered me around.
Hey! Hurry up and clean up! Everyone's staying for dinner, so prepare that too.
Finally, my colleagues scolded the arrogant Joseph.
Joseph! What are you thinking? Amanda is in the middle of her brother's funeral. What? Yeah, so?
Joseph seemed not to understand what they were trying to say. Frustrated, they explained. What do you mean, yes, so? I never thought you'd be so heartless. Amanda, you should reconsider your relationship with him. They looked at Joseph with cold eyes. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Joseph started sweating and making excuses.
No, it was a joke. You guys are overreacting. What if this actually leads to a divorce, huh?
Joseph laughed, trying to lighten the mood. But it backfired. No, even as a joke, it's unforgivable. Everyone agreed with that sentiment. Then they told me to return to the funeral right away. We'll handle Joseph. Sorry for using your yard without permission, but please let us stay a bit longer.
No, I'm the one who should be thanking. Feel free to use the yard.
I took their advice and headed back to Stephen's funeral. I hurried back, just as the cremation was about to finish.
Amanda!
Dad rushed over, looking worried. Sorry for making you worry. But it's okay now. Joseph's colleagues, who were at our house, told me to come back immediately once they learned about the situation. They even said they'd talk to Joseph. It was reassuring. When I told him what happened at home, Dad looked relieved. But he still seemed dissatisfied.
It's fine to leave it to his colleagues, but I want to say something to Joseph myself.
Dad looked angrier than I had ever seen him. I understood why. I had left it to the colleagues for now, but I also planned to talk to Joseph later. I feel the same. I won't be satisfied until I say it myself. Agreeing with Dad, we promised to talk to Joseph after the funeral. As the funeral neared its end, we heard some commotion in the distance. When I looked over, I saw Joseph wobbling unsteadily, his eyes red from being severely scolded by his colleagues.
I'm so sorry for being late. Please let me attend Stephen's funeral too.
Moreover, he wasn't wearing a suit but a tracksuit. Joseph had been enjoying a barbecue in that tracksuit, and he came smelling of grilled meat. The family members all gave him suspicious looks due to his inappropriate attire and clearly intoxicated behavior. But Joseph probably didn't even think about his outfit. Even with everyone staring at him, he didn't seem to notice anything. Amanda, make sure Joseph stays in the upstairs waiting room. The funeral will be over soon, so have him wait until then. Dad instructed me in a voice only I could hear. His voice was trying to stay calm, suppressing his anger as much as possible. Following Dad's instructions, I called out to Joseph.
Joseph! Come over here for a moment.
With the family members watching, I led Joseph to the waiting room.
What about the funeral? After my colleagues told me off, I wanted to apologize to Robert and Nancy and attend.
Not understanding anything, Joseph was quickly interrupted by me.
It will be over soon. If someone dressed so inappropriately and not considering the occasion is here, everyone will get distracted. Cool your head and wait here until it's over.
I instructed him and immediately went back. Despite the cold stares from the family members, I endured until the funeral ended. Once the funeral was over, Dad and I quickly headed to Joseph.
Robert. My condolences. I'm really sorry about Stephen.
While waiting for us, Joseph had probably looked up funeral etiquette and phrases online. His actions seemed so artificial, which further irritated Dad.
Joseph, what exactly are you doing here? Well, of course, I came to say goodbye to Stephen.
He answered Dad's question, but I had already told Dad that Joseph prioritized the barbecue over the funeral. Joseph's excuse was immediately transparent.
No, you only came because your colleagues scolded you, didn't you?
With Dad's sharp question, Joseph became flustered. His demeanor alone was like an admission of guilt, but he desperately tried to cover it up.
No, that's not true. It may have ended up that way, but Stephen really helped me a lot, and I wanted to say my final goodbye. Then why didn't you come from the start?
After Joseph made his excuse, Dad immediately asked. I wasn't about to side with Joseph, so I supported Dad.
That's right. If you really thought that, you should have canceled the barbecue plans. I'm sure your colleagues would have understood, even if you canceled on the day. You can have a barbecue anytime, but today is the last chance to see Stephen.
When I said that, Joseph fell silent and looked down.
I heard what you said to Amanda. He said that building relationships with the living is more important than a funeral. I couldn't believe it when I heard it. It seems I was mistaken about you. I thought I could entrust Amanda to you, but I was wrong.
As he spoke, Joseph started to realize what Dad was getting at.
Wait, please, wait. I want you to divorce Amanda. From now on, don't have any more involvement with her.
Despite Joseph's attempts to stop him, Dad declared firmly.
Please, I'm asking you as well. I can't live with you anymore. Let's get a divorce. Why so suddenly?
For Joseph, being asked for a divorce came out of nowhere. But for me, there were more than enough reasons beyond just the funeral incident.
Since we got married, I've been forced to do all the housework under your orders, without any freedom. Even when I wanted to work, you wouldn't let me. You tell me to save money, but you're not supportive at all. And to top it off, your behavior at the funeral was so embarrassing.
I struggled to keep my anger in check and spoke calmly. Joseph, being asked for a divorce by both me and my dad, seemed to have sobered up completely. He tried to persuade us somehow.
Okay. You can go to work. And we don't need to save money anymore. If you work, we'll have more income, so you don't need to save. Yes, I'll allow it. I hate that condescending attitude.
I wanted to have a calm discussion, but I had reached my limit.
Why do you always have to say you allow or permit things? I'm telling you I hate that, but you're not getting it at all. I've been listening too, and I have to say, Joseph, you haven't been supportive of Amanda at all. I don't think your marriage can be fixed like this.
Dad couldn't overlook the unfairness I was facing any longer. He stepped in to back me up.
I'm sorry. I'll apologize, just please don't divorce me.
When divorce was mentioned, Joseph desperately begged us to reconsider. I had a pretty good idea why he was so against it.
You just don't want to handle the housework or pay the car and house loans by yourself, right?
When I said that, Joseph's shoulders shook. It seemed I had hit the mark.
That house with the big yard, if you neglect it, it'll be overrun with weeds. And because you were so cheap, the vacuum cleaner and washing machine are both terrible. Living alone in that house will be tough, won't it?
Speaking slowly and in a low voice about the potential risks, Joseph's face turned pale as he imagined it. Seeing Joseph pale and silent, Dad spoke again.
It'll be tough, but hearing about that house makes me even more sure Amanda can't live there. Joseph, write the divorce papers right now.
Unable to bear the pressure from both of us, Joseph nodded without even making eye contact. Finally, I was able to divorce Joseph. After leaving the funeral home, I went back to our house to collect my things. Dad waited in the car while I went inside alone. Joseph spoke to me then.
Hey, are you divorcing me because Robert said so? If that's the case, let's talk it over again, just the two of us.
Actually, I had already talked to Dad about wanting a divorce. He didn't just decide that on his own. Joseph thought it was his chance with Dad not around, but I turned him down. Without further conversation, I calmly packed my things into the car. All right then. I'll submit the divorce papers. With that, Dad drove us back to my parents' house.
Dad, thank you for stepping in. If it had just been me, I wouldn't have been able to get divorced.
Don't mention it. I couldn't stand to see anything happen to my precious daughter. If Joseph bothers you again, let me know. Dad's promise to support me no matter what was reassuring. When we got home, Mom was worried about how things had turned out.
I've decided to divorce Joseph. Sorry to trouble you with coming back to live here again.
When she said that, Mom told me not to worry about it, repeating the same comforting words Dad had said earlier. I felt truly loved by my parents. After a while, I managed to get a job as a contract employee at a company near my parents' house. Having taken a break from working, I was initially anxious, but I was relieved to find myself in a very positive work environment. I was glad to have found such a great company, and my worries eased. From now on, I would be busy with work, but I also intended to actively help out with household chores. I constantly reminded myself not to become like Joseph. Since returning to work after the funeral, Joseph had been avoided by his colleagues. Despite boasting about the importance of building good relationships, he had failed miserably. It was almost laughable. From now on, Joseph would be known as an inconsiderate and terrible person at work. He would feel increasingly isolated, and his workplace relationships would deteriorate. No one would support him in his work either. Yet, due to the mortgage on the house and car, he would have to keep working at that job. Joseph would likely spend his days feeling miserable. I laughed heartily, feeling genuinely amused at his misfortune. Forgetting about poor Joseph, I decided to focus on living according to my own will and values. It was my day off, and I decided to invite my mother-in-law, Wendy, for a walk since the weather was so pleasant. As Wendy and I strolled through the neighborhood park, enjoying the warm sunshine, my husband, Scott, suddenly called. "It's terrible, Mom collapsed, apparently." He blurted out, his voice filled with worry.
What? Wendy collapsed?
I asked, confused. How could that be? Wendy was right here, walking beside me.
Yeah, that's why I've decided to go back home for a while to be with her.
Scott explained, his tone somber.
I see.
I replied, still trying to process the situation. While I struggled to make sense of it all, Wendy, who had overheard the conversation, simply smiled and whispered, "Let's keep this between us, okay?" She didn't want Scott to hear her voice.
Anyway, I'll be back by next Tuesday.
Take care, Scott said hurriedly before ending the call. I couldn't quite grasp what was happening. A few days later, Scott finally returned home. How was Wendy doing? I asked, concern etched on my face. Not too well, it seems. Scott sighed heavily as he sank into the couch, his expression grave. The time we have left with Mom might be limited, he added, his voice barely above a whisper. I understand. I nodded, my heart aching for my husband. Since then, Wendy and I had been in regular contact, making various preparations without Scott's knowledge. Unaware of our secret, Scott muttered,
"What a predicament!"
as he started fiddling with his smartphone. At that very moment,
"Will you marry me?"
my boyfriend asked, getting down on one knee in the middle of a fancy restaurant I never could have imagined visiting when I first arrived in New York 5 years ago. Today was the happiest day of my life. I knew in my heart that this was the man I wanted to spend my life with. It was a day I would never forget, a day I made a promise to myself. My name is Angela. I moved to this city after losing both of my parents. Growing up in the countryside, I was always aware of how freely I lived. So, when I first arrived in New York, I was overwhelmed by the towering skyscrapers and the sheer number of people, and I couldn't move for a while, frozen in awe and intimidation. However, having grown up in the countryside, I was unfamiliar with many aspects of city life. In my hometown, we never had the habit of locking the house when going out, and it was common to receive vegetables from neighbors rather than buying them ourselves. Of course, working in a company was also a new experience for me, and I made countless mistakes at first. Angela, what kind of job did you have initially? Scott asked as we enjoyed the lavish meal before us.
I worked as a clerk in a commercial company. There weren't many places willing to hire me,
I replied, reminiscing about my early days in New York with my boyfriend, no, my now fiancé. Why did you switch to working at the library? Were you having trouble with your coworkers? He inquired, genuinely curious.
No, everyone got along fairly well. It's just that the company had incredibly long working hours,
I explained, recalling the exhausting schedule.
That makes sense. Coming to New York so suddenly, you wouldn't have known which companies were risky.
Scott nodded understandingly.
Exactly. And at the time, I didn't even realize that the company was operating illegally. I was just being used for their convenience, but I thought that was the norm in the city. It's scary how you can get used to things like that,
I confessed, reflecting on my naivety. Back then, I was desperate for any job that would hire me. With moving expenses and funeral costs, my savings were nearly depleted, and I needed to start earning money as soon as possible. Compared to my hometown, salaries in New York were higher across the board, and with the frequent subway services, I thought I'd never have trouble getting home. But reality wasn't so kind. The company I finally managed to get hired at required me to start work with the first train and leave with the last one every day. We only had a 30-minute lunch break, and going out during work hours was strictly prohibited. I was saving money, but I had no time to spend it. At first, I genuinely believed that this was normal.
That must have been tough. But what made you decide to become a librarian?
Scott asked, his eyes filled with empathy.
I had actually gotten my librarian certification in college. But when I first came to New York, I gave up on the idea because the libraries were too far away. Eventually, I made the bold decision to quit my job, move to a new place, and managed to find employment at a library,
I explained, remembering the turning point in my life. Was there a specific reason that made you quit?
One day, I saw a person crouched in front of an eye clinic. I helped them get to the station, but it made me late for work. My boss was furious,
I recounted, the memory still vivid in my mind. He yelled at me for about 3 hours, not just for being late but also for always working slowly and dressing sloppily, as if venting all his pent-up stress on me. The look on his face that day was so traumatic, I can never forget it. What? You were just trying to help someone, and they treated you like that? Scott exclaimed, outraged on my behalf.
Yeah. That's when I realized the company was terrible, and I submitted my resignation letter that very day,
I said, still proud of my decision. Your ability to take action is amazing. That's one of the things I admire about you. Thanks to that, we were able to meet each other. I'm so grateful. Scott smiled, his eyes full of love and appreciation.
That's true. I hope that person I helped is doing well,
I mused, thinking back to that fateful encounter. From the day I changed jobs and started working at the library, my life transformed dramatically. I had proper days off and could even take vacations. My colleagues were incredibly kind and patiently taught me the ropes, even though I was a newcomer. The salary was lower than my previous company, but being surrounded by the books I loved and finding fulfillment in my work brought me immense joy. After a few dates, we officially became a couple. I'm filled with gratitude for the books that brought us together.
Oh, by the way, I'd like to go and give Mom the news soon.
Do you have any free days coming up? Scott asked, his eyes shining with excitement.
How about next Sunday?
I suggested, mentally running through my schedule. Okay. I'll let Mom know then. She can be a bit strict, but she's not a bad person. I'm sure she'll accept you, Angela. No need to be nervous. He reassured me, sensing my apprehension.
Thanks. Let me know what Wendy likes, so I can get her something nice,
I said, wanting to make a good first impression. Sure. Let's go shopping together. Maybe you could gift her a book you recommend? Scott proposed, always thoughtful.
That's a great idea.
I agreed, feeling grateful for his support. We continued our light-hearted conversation as more dishes were served. The food was delicious, of course, and the wine was so good that I accidentally drank a little too much. But I'll never forget the signed marriage license Scott handed me at the end of the night. It filled me with so much joy. I wished every day could be like this forever. A few days later, it was time to visit Wendy's house. I was a little nervous, as it was our first meeting. I woke up earlier than usual and took extra care with my appearance.
Welcome. Thank you both for coming all this way.
Wendy greeted us warmly as we entered her home. Thanks, Mom. This is my wife, Angela. Scott introduced me, his hand resting gently on the small of my back.
It's a pleasure to meet you, Wendy. I look forward to getting to know you better,
I said sincerely, wanting to start off on the right foot. As we settled in, Wendy, who seemed kind, began making small talk.
So, Angela, what do you do for work?
She asked, just as I was starting to feel at ease after discussing my hometown and hobbies. I sensed a slight shift in the atmosphere. She works as a librarian, Scott answered proudly.
Oh, a librarian?
Wendy's tone held a hint of surprise. Is something wrong? He asked, picking up on her reaction. No, of course not.
There's nothing wrong with that,
she said quickly, but I noticed a shadow cross her face. I hadn't expected my profession to be a topic of concern, and I felt beads of sweat forming on my palms.
I'll be frank with you, Angela. You know, the cost of living in New York is quite high, right? That's why I'm a little worried about your financial situation. Is this really the career you want to pursue?
Wendy questioned, her words sharp but tinged with apology. I understood her worries. When thinking about the future, it made sense that she would prefer her son's wife to have a higher-paying job.
Yes, I have no intention of changing careers,
I replied firmly, despite my nerves. I knew I had to convey my thoughts to Wendy here and now. It was scary, but she was Scott's mom. Surely, she would understand. With that belief, I held my ground and answered confidently.
I used to work for an illegal company, but I made the decision to change jobs and become a librarian. I believe that through books, I can bring happiness to people. It's the first time I've found a career that feels so fulfilling. That's right, Mom. Angela and I met at the library where she works. It's like books brought us together. Don't worry about money, I'll handle that,
Scott chimed in, supporting my stance.
I take great pride in this job. If we ever face financial difficulties, I'm prepared to take on part-time work or whatever is necessary. That's how much I want to continue in this profession,
I stated, my voice a little stronger than intended, but I wanted to express my thoughts honestly. Wendy nodded slowly, her expression still somewhat troubled.
I see. Angela, I lost my husband and raised Scott on my own. I can't easily give my blessing to this marriage. So, I want you to prove to me, little by little, that you're a respectable person, she said. Of course, Wendy,
I replied with a big smile, my voice filled with confidence. The tension in the room dissipated instantly, and normal conversation resumed. Finally able to relax, both Scott and I breathed a sigh of relief. The more we talked, the more I realized that Wendy was a family-oriented, kind-hearted person. Although Wendy's house was a bit far and we wouldn't be living together, I was determined to build a good relationship with her. For the past 15 years, I've been regularly visiting Wendy's house, just as I declared I would. While my first impression of Wendy was that she was strict, every time I brought a book I had chosen, she would happily share her thoughts on it. Before I knew it, we were holding regular book club meetings over coffee. As a book lover, it was the perfect way to unwind, and I was thrilled to participate since it allowed me to grow closer to Wendy. I must remember to thank Scott for suggesting I recommend books to her. However, lately, I haven't been able to talk much with Scott. At first, our married life was blissfully happy, like a dream come true. Scott, who was kind and thoughtful, was the ideal husband, helping me forget the loneliness of losing my parents. He assisted with household chores and surprised me with bouquets on our anniversaries. Every day was filled with joy, but in recent years, there's no trace of that anymore. It's natural for the initial freshness to fade after so many years, but Scott's slovenly side has become more noticeable. We used to do laundry and housework together, but now he leaves everything to me. He doesn't even put clothes in the washing machine properly, and his socks are always inside out. When I pointed out,
it's a hassle. If you have a problem with it, do it yourself,
he said. He stopped cleaning up his own dishes, refuses to improve his eating habits despite the doctor's warnings, and complains about the healthy meals I prepare. Scott, don't you think your attitude is a bit too cold? I sigh, looking at the leftover food on his plate today. It's a menu I designed specifically for him, as he's prone to iron and calcium deficiencies. He used to praise my cooking, saying it was delicious, but now,
really?
He replied, sounding disinterested.
You come home late, and you don't even eat the meals I prepare properly.
I pointed out, my frustration growing. What are you trying to say? He asked, his tone defensive.
Do you think I'm your housekeeper or something?
I questioned, lowering my voice a little. In the beginning, he used to say that as a married couple, it was only natural for us to do household chores together, but now he does nothing. Yet, if there's a day when I don't make dinner, he gets angry and storms out. Having to do housework while constantly worrying about Scott's mood was becoming quite stressful. I was fed up with it.
I don't think that at all,
he claimed.
Then what's with your attitude lately? I'm not your maid, you know,
I retorted.
You think I see you that way?
That's ridiculous.
I'm trying to show you affection, but if you can't see that, then fine,
he said, his words dripping with exasperation.
Affection? I don't feel that from you at all,
I shot back. What about you?
It's because of my salary that you get to live in such a nice house, isn't it?
Stop complaining, he snapped before retreating to his room. I sank to my knees, taking deep breaths to try and suppress the emotions welling up inside me. This kind of thing happens over and over again. Whenever I point something out, he twists the conversation to make it seem like I'm the one at fault. We don't even sleep in the same bed anymore. Swallowing the word painful, I start cleaning up the leftover food. I wish my exhaustion could flow away with the running water. With that thought in mind, I washed the dishes alone, feeling utterly lonely. A few days later. It was a weekday, but the library was closed, so I had the day off. The weather was nice, so I decided to visit Wendy's house and invite her for a walk. Wendy agreed, and as we strolled through a nearby park, enjoying the pleasant sunshine, my phone rang. It was Scott. "It's terrible. Mom collapsed, apparently," he said, his voice filled with worry.
What? Wendy collapsed?
I asked, confused. What was Scott talking about? Wendy was right here, walking beside me.
That's why I've decided to go back home for a while to check on her,
he explained.
I see,
I replied, still trying to process the situation. In contrast to my confusion, Wendy, who had been listening to the conversation beside me, smiled and said,
"Let's keep this between us, okay?"
She didn't want Scott to hear her voice. The atmosphere changed so abruptly that I almost cried out in surprise. "Yeah. But you probably have work, so don't worry about it. Phone calls and stuff might stress Mom out, so you don't need to make any," Scott said. "But don't you have work too, Scott?" I asked. "This is an emergency with Mom. Of course I'm going to take time off to go see her," he replied, as if it were obvious. "I see. When will you be back home?" I inquired. "For now, I'll be back by Tuesday night next week. Anyway, I gotta go," he said hurriedly before ending the call. I clutched my smartphone tightly, staring at the ground. As I stood there in a daze, Wendy placed her hand over mine.
"I'm sorry, Angela. Can you leave the rest to me?"
she asked gently. My heart had been pounding loudly the whole time, but Wendy's words calmed me down a little, and I went home as she instructed. From then on, I kept in regular contact with Wendy as we made various preparations. Days passed, and on Tuesday night, Scott returned home, just as he had declared.
"I'm home,"
he announced. "Welcome back. How was Wendy doing?" I asked. "Not too well, it seems. I might have to go check on her every now and then. So there might be more days when I can't come home."
"What? Really?"
Scott said, his expression grave as he sank into the couch. I responded, my voice and face showing an exaggerated level of surprise. "The time I have left with Mom might be limited, and I want to cherish it. You understand, right?" he asked. "Of course, and actually, I'll come with you," I offered. "No, I want it to be just the two of us. It's our last time together as a family. Besides, Mom didn't think too highly of you at first, right?" he reminded me.
"That's..."
My voice trembled. Scott muttered, "What a predicament," as he picked up his smartphone. Seeing that, I couldn't hold it in anymore and burst out laughing, holding my stomach.
"Scott, you're the best,"
I said, still chuckling.
"Huh? What the hell, Angela? Mom's in critical condition and you're laughing? What kind of messed up sense of humor do you have?"
he snapped, clearly annoyed. Scott tossed his phone aside carelessly and stood up, approaching me with an angry expression on his face. I stopped him with my hand and opened the door to the adjacent room connected to the living room. "Who's in critical condition?" I asked.
"Huh? Mom? How?"
Scott stammered. None other than Wendy emerged from the room. Seeing her, Scott completely lost his composure, his face growing paler by the second. In contrast, Wendy approached Scott with a fierce intensity.
What have you been doing this past week?
She demanded.
What do you mean?
He replied weakly.
As you can see, I'm perfectly fine.
What have you been up to? She pressed.
That's...
Scott trailed off, averting his gaze from Wendy and falling silent. Of course, with a super healthy Wendy standing right in front of him, he couldn't keep lying any longer.
Hey, Angela. What's going on? Did you call Mom? I told you not to because it would stress her out.
Scott snapped, unbelievably trying to direct his anger at me. However, we had the upper hand, so I wasn't afraid at all.
You know, when you called, I was out walking with Wendy.
I explained. I showed Scott my chat history with Wendy. It clearly showed me inviting her for a walk since the library was closed and I had the day off, and Wendy happily agreeing to join me.
In other words, we knew you were lying from the start.
I said, my tone firm.
What? But why? I thought you two weren't that close. At first, Mom even complained about your low salary, Angela.
Scott said, confusion written all over his face.
That was only in the beginning. I said those mean things to test Angela.
Wendy clarified.
Huh?
Scott looked at her, dumbfounded.
Even after I said those things, Angela still brought me recommended books and invited me out. That's a far cry from you, who never comes to visit.
Wendy said, her tone dripping with exasperation. Scott remained defiant in the face of Wendy's words.
I didn't know that. And why didn't you tell me, Angela?
He asked, turning to me.
I did tell you at first. But recently, you haven't been willing to talk to me, remember?
I reminded him. Of course, I never intended to keep it a secret initially, but his refusal to listen to me had come back to bite him. If he had known about my connection with Wendy, things might not have turned out this way. Scott hung his head, looking utterly frustrated. His phone was vibrating, but he was too dejected to pay any attention to it.
Remember how I told you that back when I was working at my previous company, I helped someone in front of the eye clinic? And that it was the catalyst for me changing jobs?
I asked.
I think I remember that.
He mumbled.
That person was me. It's a small world, isn't it?
Wendy revealed, a hint of amusement in her voice. Yes, that was the biggest event that brought Wendy and me closer together. While we were having coffee and I was reminiscing about that time.
Ah.
Wendy suddenly exclaimed.
That was me.
She said, her eyes wide with surprise. Apparently, Wendy had been suffering from a complex eye condition at the time and had come to the clinic for surgery. However, after the operation, she got lost and was at a loss for what to do when someone called out to her. Since it was right after the surgery, her vision wasn't clear yet, so she couldn't see the person's face. That's why she didn't recognize me when she saw my face, but she seemed to gain certainty after hearing my story. I was so happy to meet the person who helped me back then again. That's another reason why we've become such good friends. Wendy said, smiling warmly.
I was so exhausted at the time that I couldn't really see people's faces, so I had no idea it was you. I've been worried about whether you made it home safely all this time.
I confessed. Thanks to you, I did. Well, right now, it seems like Scott sees me as a terminally ill patient. Maybe Scott should be the one getting eye surgery next. Wendy joked. Scott, who usually has such a condescending attitude towards me, couldn't seem to win against Wendy. He opened his mouth as if he wanted to say something, but no sound came out. At that moment, the door leading to the adjacent room opened again, and a woman's voice called out.
Scott. Huh, Tina?
Scott stammered, his eyes widening in shock.
Good evening.
It's been a day, hasn't it? Tina said, smiling sadly as she faced Scott. Tina was a little younger than me, with well-defined features and a slender figure that looked great in her floral dress. Seeing her shoulders tremble slightly, I felt a strong urge to protect her. I could understand a little why Scott might have fallen for her.
Why is Tina here?
Scott asked, his voice shaking.
After we parted ways yesterday, I went home and found these people there.
They told me everything. You were married, weren't you? Tina said, her tone a mix of hurt and accusation.
How did you find out?
Scott mumbled, avoiding eye contact.
I hired a private investigator to look into everything. Over the past week,
Wendy explained. A week ago, right after I hung up on Scott's call, Wendy sent me home and immediately headed to a detective agency. She told them she wanted them to investigate her son's infidelity right away, no matter how much it cost. As a result, evidence was quickly gathered, and they were able to identify Tina's home and contact her.
Scott, you got along well with my parents too, didn't you? My mom and dad are furious. Of course, I am too. I brought them here today because I wanted to resolve this issue,
Tina said, her voice trembling with emotion. According to the investigation, Tina was apparently a client at Scott's company, and they both fell in love at first sight, as she told us herself. Tina didn't know Scott was married, and she apologized, saying that if she had known, she never would have gotten involved with him. Her parents, who had been looking forward to their marriage, were outraged when they learned about Scott's true identity and apologized to me sincerely afterward. Tina and her parents had done nothing wrong, yet they apologized to me, which made my heart ache and fueled my anger towards Scott even more. That's why I also apologized to Tina and her parents and suggested that we come here today.
So, Scott's infidelity has been completely exposed. I'll give you a lawyer's contact information later, and you can handle the rest through them,
I said, my voice steady despite the overwhelming emotions.
How do you plan on surviving without me? The cost of living has skyrocketed compared to the past. You can't live on your salary alone.
Scott glared at me, his anger palpable. I felt my body tense up a bit, but Wendy stepped in front of us as if to shield me from his wrath. Actually, I've started something recently, Wendy said, showing Scott a screen on her smartphone.
Huh? What's this?
He asked, confusion written all over his face.
I've started investing in real estate lately. It's been incredibly profitable. That's why I could afford the high costs of hiring a detective,
Wendy explained, a hint of pride in her voice. What Wendy showed him was a graph of her investments. She had already been studying a bit, and her investments were a huge success. Of course, I also helped out by putting the knowledge I'd gained from university and my beloved books to good use. By now, her profits had easily surpassed Scott's salary.
So, you don't need to worry about money on our end. You, on the other hand, will be facing alimony and settlement claims in the divorce proceedings, leading to a life of poverty. I think you should worry about yourself,
Wendy said, her tone sharp and unforgiving.
What? Alimony and settlement claims in a divorce? You're joking, right?
Scott scoffed, disbelief etched on his features.
No, it's only natural since you cheated. You'll be paying for both my share and Tina's,
I stated firmly, leaving no room for argument. Scott muttered,
This can't be happening.
But then a wicked smile spread across his face as if he had thought of something. He stood up triumphantly and pointed at me. Too bad for you, Angela.
I have Mom's inheritance. I can easily pay the alimony and settlement for the divorce. But I'll be able to return to my original lifestyle in no time,"
he declared, his voice dripping with arrogance.
"How on earth did you become so stupid?"
Wendy sighed, holding her head in exasperation as she stood beside me. I couldn't agree more.
"Come on, Mom. This is a critical moment for your precious son. Please help me out,"
Scott pleaded, his tone suddenly desperate.
"Scott, you are indeed my dear son. But I don't remember raising you to do such inhumane things,"
Wendy said, her voice filled with disappointment.
"What?"
Scott's eyes widened in shock.
"I'm cutting ties with you. From now on, you'll have to live on your own,"
she announced, her words like a hammer striking the final blow.
"You can't be serious. What about the inheritance then?"
he asked, grasping at straws.
"I'm thinking of giving it to Angela,"
Wendy replied, her voice unwavering. I couldn't help but exclaim. What? I had heard that she was considering disowning him, but she hadn't said a word about the inheritance. However, knowing that she cherished me to that extent brought tears of joy to my eyes, especially since I had lost my own parents.
"Angela, if it's all right with you, would you like us to become a real mother and daughter?"
Wendy asked, her voice filled with warmth and sincerity. Those words made my body feel hot with emotion. They were the words I had longed to hear.
"Ever since my parents passed away, I've been so lonely. Are you really sure about this?"
I asked, my voice trembling with a mix of hope and disbelief.
"Of course. I look forward to being your mother from now on,"
Wendy replied, her smile radiating love and acceptance. "Wendy, no," Mom opened her arms and faced me, and I didn't hesitate to rush into her embrace. Ah, the warmth of a mother's hug, something I hadn't felt in so long. Today might have been the worst day of my life, but it was also the best. Seeing us like that, Scott raised his voice.
"This can't be real."
And he shouted.
"I see, Angela. So this was your plan from the beginning, wasn't it? You got close to me because you were after Mom's inheritance, and you deceived her,"
he accused, his face red with anger. I had just one thing to say to Scott as he yelled at me with fury etched on his features.
"You brought this upon yourself."
I felt like the emotions I had bottled up for years were finally being released. From now on, I could live freely with Wendy, no longer bound by Scott's whims.
"By the way, this has been ringing non-stop."
"Here you go," Tina said, handing Scott his vibrating phone. As he angrily answered the call, a man's furious voice could be heard shouting.
"You're fired! Trouble with a client? Marriage fraud? There must be some mistake."
Scott stammered, his face turning pale as he desperately tried to explain himself, but he was quickly cut off, leaving him helpless. In front of a completely deflated Scott, only Tina stood, smiling just as she had at the beginning.
"Tina, you're on my side, right?"
Scott pleaded, reaching out to her as if she were his last hope. But Tina swatted his hand away.
"Scott, I went through a terrible divorce in the past, and I truly believed that this time I could find happiness,"
she said, her voice filled with disappointment and hurt.
"Tina,"
Scott whispered, his eyes wide with desperation.
"But it turns out you were just the same as my ex. I'm the one who reported you to the company. Goodbye,"
Tina declared before heading towards the front door. Wendy followed after her. I handed Scott, who must have been facing true despair, the divorce papers I had signed, and then I left the house. After that, Scott seemed to have surrendered, and the divorce was finalized surprisingly easily. After receiving a hefty alimony payment from the divorce settlement, Wendy and I moved into an apartment to avoid any potential attacks from Scott. I heard rumors about how Scott was doing afterwards, apparently struggling to find a new job. It's no wonder, since we had spread the word about his misdeeds, making it difficult for him to find employment in the same industry. I hope he's living a life of poverty now. Good morning, Wendy. I greeted her with a smile.
Good morning, Angela. It's a beautiful day, isn't it?
She replied, her eyes twinkling with joy. How about we have a picnic in that big park? I suggested, feeling the warmth of the sun on my skin.
That sounds lovely. Shall we make some sandwiches to take with us?
Wendy proposed, already heading towards the kitchen. Meanwhile, I was living peacefully with Wendy in our apartment. We studied real estate investing together and frequented the library. On our days off, we would go out, share our thoughts on books, and enjoy the leisurely pace of life. Our investments continue to be successful, and Wendy's savings keep growing. Spending time with my beloved books and my dear Wendy, I am truly happy now.
Come on, swim faster or you'll drown.
From way above me, I could hear the laughter of my husband who had pushed me into the river. I had broken both my legs a month ago. There was no way I could swim. As I desperately struggled to keep from sinking in the cold water, my husband said something. Hearing that, all the patience I had been holding on to felt foolish. My name is Isabella. I'm a 26-year-old office worker. I have a husband, Joe, who is 34 and also an office worker. Though we're a few years apart, his vast life experience has been a support to me in many ways. Joe and I met at work, where he was my boss. Initially, Joe made the first move, but I was drawn to him for his competence and leadership in various situations. Our relationship smoothly progressed to marriage. Working for a company with branches nationwide, I transferred to a different branch after getting married, feeling nervous yet fulfilled in my new environment. As a dual-income couple, we shared household chores. This company is ideal for me, eager to learn everything I can here, making studying indispensable even amidst a busy schedule. Joe also worked late, which motivated me to do my best. Being in the same company, we could easily understand what the other was working on and share daily events, making conversations with Joe very enjoyable. Initially, things were going well, but at some point, when I consulted Joe about work as usual. So you've gotten to handle such tasks now. Well, do your best. He responded somewhat coldly. The Joe I knew before would listen until I was satisfied and think of solutions together. I felt a bit lonely, but wondered if I had been a burden. Joe was busy, and I was no longer a newcomer. Telling myself that I should be able to solve things on my own by now, I consulted my new boss when in real trouble and tried not to discuss work at home. Then, on payday, "How much did you earn this month?" Joe asked for the first time. We had agreed to contribute a fixed amount from our salaries for living expenses and bills without knowing each other's exact incomes. It was unusual for Joe to ask such a question, but seeing no reason to hide it, I showed him my payslip. Then Joe, shocked, said,
All this without overtime. Don't joke with me. When did you start earning so much?
Far from being happy about the increased household income, Joe started treating me with a hostile attitude from that day on. Looking back, I remember hearing that Joe had an unusually high pride and only liked being around people who could boost his self-esteem.
It's because I've been sharing the housework that you can earn like this. I want to get promoted too, but I've been holding back.
Joe said that and instructed me to take over all the household chores.
A wife should play a supporting role to her husband and be modest,
he said abusively. Shocked, but verbally compliant. Understood. Please focus on your work. I said, while internally taking it as a challenge to manage all the housework and still excel at my job. However, seeing me juggle work and all the household chores, Joe would say things like,
"I wish you'd just break down already."
or,
"Can't you clean more thoroughly? I hate it when the room doesn't look like a showroom."
I tried to brush it off, but it was undeniably stressful. Perhaps it was wrong to keep thinking about divorce every day, whether at home or work. One day on my way to work, I missed a step on the station stairs and tumbled down a long way. I don't remember falling, but it must have been a bad fall because I ended up breaking both legs. Fortunately, no one else was involved in the accident during the morning rush, but I had to be hospitalized for a while. When Joe visited the hospital, he seemed annoyed and laughed.
"Lately, you've been too proud of your work success. This is your punishment."
And said,
"Your fractures are nothing serious, so come back home soon."
and left. After that, Joe did visit daily but only to angrily say,
"The house is dirty, come back soon."
without a word of concern for me. I explained the situation to my workplace and started working from the hospital. When Joe tried to take away the laptop, saying,
"You're really greedy for money. I told you not to earn more than me."
I quickly responded,
"I've already informed my boss, and I have work scheduled today. If you don't give it back, I'll have to call and say you took it."
which made him return it with a click of his tongue, perhaps fearing it would become widely known since we work at the same company. Despite expressing how much he disliked me, Joe continued to visit my hospital room daily after work to complain. Upon finally returning home after my hospital stay, the room was extremely dirty.
"I've left your work for you. You love work and housework, so you must be happy,"
Joe said, but I was still in a wheelchair, unable to walk. Trying to clean what I could reach, like the desk.
"Wait, you still can't stand and work? Taking too long to heal. Isn't it because you're always sitting in that wheelchair?"
He criticized. I wanted to divorce him right there and then, but I couldn't move properly until my legs healed. I couldn't tell the hospital, where I had planned to have Joe take care of me post-divorce, that I wanted to be readmitted, so I endured until I fully recovered, thinking it was just a matter of patience. I told myself that overcoming this would make me stronger, and I'd divorce Joe, living each day without consulting anyone. One day, Joe's attitude changed completely.
"How about we go see a movie? There's something I want to see,"
he suggested. Though I felt a bit happy, the change was so drastic that it felt odd, so I replied,
"It's unusual for you to suggest that. I still have chores to do, so feel free to go by yourself."
But Joe said,
"Actually, my boss found out about my behavior and your situation and gave me an earful. I've been a burden till now, so I want us to go together. We haven't been out recently, and I want Isabella to take a break as a token of my gratitude."
Then he asked,
"What else needs to be done?"
and took care of everything. It had been a while since we went out together. Though I was suspicious, Joe tends to change his attitude quickly if someone in a position of authority speaks to him. If his boss had spoken to him, maybe he truly wanted to change. With that thought, I felt slightly happy, and given how tense I'd been every day, I decided to indulge in the break and agreed to go out. He helped me into the car, and we started our drive. The cinema was relatively close, so I didn't think it would be too much of a burden for him to drive, but we kept moving away from the direction of the cinema I knew. Curiously, I asked,
"Isn't the cinema in that direction?"
Joe replied with a smile.
"The local cinema wouldn't feel special, right? I thought we'd go to a bigger one today."
Feeling reassured, I let Joe take the lead and soon fell asleep in the car, tired from the daily grind. "We're here." Joe's voice woke me up, and we were at a deserted river, with no cinema in sight. Confused, I asked,
"What's going on?"
Joe said, "The weather's nice, how about we take a commemorative photo?" And grabbed my arm tightly, trying to pull me out of the car. Suddenly frightened, I resisted, but with my legs being weak and the strength of a man being overwhelming, I was forcibly dragged out. Without being put back in my wheelchair, the pain of dragging my legs made me groan. He dragged me near a bridge, gripping my legs as if to lift me, and I felt a fear like never before.
"Stop!"
I involuntarily screamed, but with no one around to help, I felt nothing but despair at the thought of being thrown off. Then Joe, checking to make sure no one was around and annoyed, said,
"Damn it! Don't make a noise! It'll be trouble if someone calls the cops,"
and forcefully pushed me into the river. It happened in an instant. Unlike in dramas, I didn't see the face of the person pushing me or my life flash before my eyes. I just fell into the river. In an instant, not understanding what had happened, I looked up from the river, desperately asking for help from Joe while angry, but he said,
"Better swim fast or you'll drown. Don't be mad just because you fell into the river. Maybe you need a little hardship, huh?"
And then he tried to leave. I pleaded,
"Please help me. I'll do anything you say from now on."
Even though I didn't mean it, I thought it was the only way to be saved. Still, Joe said,
"You're healed, right? Swim back home,"
and laughed, then left without trying to help, drove away in his car. Desperately wanting to live, I managed to grab onto a floating log, struggling with the pain in my legs and my inability to move properly, let alone my poor swimming skills, teetering between life and death. If no one came to help. Just then,
"Are you okay? Hold on, I'm coming to help you."
a man hurried from the shore. A man with a large empty plastic bottle swam to me, gave it to me for buoyancy, and then pulled me to shore, saving me. After being urgently transported. "Thank you, really, thank you so much," I said to the man, crying from gratitude. "No problem at all. My name is Brian. I was fishing a bit away and saw a woman being forcibly taken out of a car. I was shocked and sorry I couldn't reach you before you got wet," he replied. Despite everything happening so quickly, from being pulled out of the car to being pushed into the river, I was grateful for his help. "Not at all. You saved my life." I expressed my thanks. After sharing with Brian and the doctor about Joe's usual behavior at home and what happened this time, both were outraged and immediately reported it. The next day, to witness Joe's arrest, Brian and I went home together. I was still not fully healed, so I was in a wheelchair. The police were waiting for Joe as he returned home from work. Seeing me and Brian, Joe looked between us and mockingly said,
"Did you have an affair and get in trouble with the police?"
"Your life is over." Laughing. Confused by his absurd conclusion, the police said,
"What are you talking about? We're here to take care of you,"
and handcuffed Joe. Joe, yelling, said,
"What did I do? Who is this guy? Explain,"
trying to grab me even as the police restrained him. Astonished, I said,
"Did you forget what you did to me? Dragging me out of the car and pushing me into the river? That's a crime, isn't it?"
Looking straight into Joe's eyes.
"But you're alive, so I don't see why I'd be arrested,"
Joe retorted nonsensically. Being alive doesn't justify anything. Joe didn't apologize for anything he had done. Far from it, he insisted he was not at fault, and to me, he no longer seemed like a husband but something devoid of human compassion.
The act of throwing someone into the river, given the real possibility of death resulting from it, is considered attempted murder.
The police explained carefully. Joe had heard of fractures but never experienced one himself. Many around him had suffered fractures and seemed to live normally, so Joe perceived it as a minor injury.
I thought fractures healed quickly, and given Isabella's resilience, I assumed she'd easily climb out of the river unharmed.
Joe argued, claiming his arrest was an overreaction. He also assumed my absence from home was due to my reluctance to do housework, maintaining his innocence. Then, Brian, who had been silent till now.
All I've heard is you justifying your actions. It seems you're not concerned about Isabella's injuries. From what I witnessed, your indifference is unbelievable.
He spoke up. Joe scoffed.
You claim to have seen the scene, but there was no one there, was there? Do you have proof you were present?
To which Brian countered, showing Joe a video.
There's plenty of evidence.
Though taken from a distance, it clearly captured Joe dropping me into the river.
When I arrived, Isabella was nearly drowning, teetering on the edge of life and death. You wouldn't have seen, having left after dropping her. It's hard to tell from above, but the current was strong.
Brian continued.
From the bridge, it might have seemed deserted, but the shore had people like me fishing, or couples jogging, surprisingly many witnesses. They all provided evidence for Isabella.
Brian proudly showed Joe the videos. Joe's face visibly paled as if in a cartoon.
This was taken by another couple. As someone with a loved one, I find this unforgivable. They insisted you must pay for your actions.
Brian silenced Joe. Frustrated and unable to retort, Joe could only glare at us. Seeing him, I said, "Showing this in court will certainly demonstrate the malice in your actions." Finally conceding, I'm sorry. Joe apologized. He pleaded, "Please, I have a job. Spare me the arrest and the trial." But I realized his apology was only out of fear of his company finding out. Unforgiven, we proceeded to trial. Upon hearing of the trial, Joe protested.
I apologized. What more do you want? I'll fight this in court. I won't let you have her way.
His outcry didn't deter me. I was determined to see the trial through. With decisive evidence in hand and Brian's support, I was able to calmly face Joe to the end. Joe insisted that fractures were minor injuries that everyone around him recovered from easily, attempting to depict me as lazy, but no one was swayed. I had been discharged from the hospital to continue rehabilitation at home, as explained by the doctor, not because I was fully healed. Joe's attempt to diagnose me without medical expertise only garnered sympathy for me from everyone present. The judge, after viewing the evidence I brought, handed down a swift prison sentence without probation to Joe, citing the maliciousness of his actions. Even after the verdict, Joe refused to give up.
The judge and police are all deceived. Is she even really fractured? If so, her suffering seems like an act.
And
stop this nonsense and just obey me like before. What happened to you, Isabella?
He ranted. To which I quietly responded, "The one who is wrong here is you." Joe's continued slander worsened the judge's impression, extending his sentence, as he inflicted more pain upon himself through his actions. Finally, everything ended, and I was free from Joe through divorce, feeling both exhausted and relieved. The more I put effort into my work, the more Joe used to get angry in the past. But now, I can focus entirely on what I want. It's as if Joe never existed, I concentrate on what's in front of me and steadily build my career. Fortunately, my workplace had no one who undermined others' character. And the depressive state Joe's attitude had induced in me gradually improved, allowing me to reclaim my former self. I also moved out of the cramped house I had lived in, enjoying a more elegant lifestyle, managing household chores and indulging in my interests as if reclaiming my lost time. Life is good now. Maybe marriage isn't for me for a while, I mused, noticing Brian looking at me sadly. The person I am today exists thanks to Brian, who saved me when I was drowning in the river. He was there for me, exhausted in both body and mind, after the trial ended and the divorce was finalized. He accompanied me during my hospital stay and my first trial, which is why I desperately wanted to express my gratitude by inviting him out for a meal on my treat today. Yet, considering Brian's busy daily schedule, I felt it wouldn't be right to invite him out too frequently, so I decided this would be a one-time gesture. Expecting the conversation to remain formal, I was surprised how well we got along, realizing hours had passed. I looked at the watch and realized, "Sorry for taking up your valuable time. Let's call it a day. I had fun. Thank you," I said, preparing to leave, but Brian asked, "Can I invite you out again sometime?" With a smile. Relieved he had enjoyed himself, we parted ways. Following Brian's invitation, we grew closer through multiple meetings, eventually dating and, surprisingly, marrying. Despite my initial apprehensions about a second marriage, Brian proved to be the ideal partner, supporting my career without jealousy or interference, enhancing my performance. Our relationship, built on mutual respect, allowed us to lead vibrant lives. Brian's hobby of fishing became a shared interest, helping me overcome my trauma of nearly drowning. Thanks to Brian's kindness, I've been able to live freely and happily.
You can't even show your grandparents' face, you unfilial person.
With that, my sister looked at me triumphantly. It's been 5 years since I got married, and while taking care of my father at my parents' home, I've been undergoing fertility treatments. My sister got married and was blessed with a child within 6 months. 2 months into her pregnancy, she returned to our parents' home for the birth. When I point out that my sister does nothing around the house, she coldly snaps back at me.
Since you're useless because you can't have children, at least be useful to me.
My name is Johanna, I'm 35 years old. I live with my husband Andrew, and my sister Camilla, taking care of our father, Richard. Andrew and I got married 5 years ago, and we've been struggling to have children, currently undergoing fertility treatments. Camilla also got married and lives in a condominium with her husband, William, who is often away on business trips, leaving her alone at home a lot. Claiming it was for early birth preparation, she moved in with us, where Richard and my husband and I live, 2 months into her pregnancy. Our mother passed away early from illness, so Richard raised Camilla and me by himself. However, Camilla has always been troublesome, causing problems ever since she was a child. In elementary school, she would hit other kids, and Richard was often called to the school to apologize. We hoped she would calm down as she grew older, but that never happened. She kept causing problems until she graduated high school, constantly troubling Richard. Richard had to go around apologizing to people, paying for damages, and was always exhausted from cleaning up after Camilla. Feeling sorry for Richard, I helped around the house as much as I could, cooking and doing laundry, so that he could have a bit of rest. Putting ourselves last, Richard devoted himself to raising us. I wanted to ease Richard's burden, so I studied whenever I had the chance. My hard work paid off, and I was able to attend a prestigious university and land a job at a major company. Now, I work remotely while taking care of Richard. Camilla, who moved in with us a month ago, does not do any housework and doesn't care for Richard, despite the trouble she caused him. Instead, she says, "Hey, big sis, isn't today's dinner too plain? I'm pregnant, so I need nutrition. Make a more luxurious dinner tonight. Oh, and polish my shoes before I go out." She treats me like a housekeeper, ordering me around. My sister, having become pregnant before me, thinks she has the upper hand.
Why don't you take care of your own things for once?
I was stressed out by Camilla's inactivity. Lying on the living room sofa, she glared at me.
You can't even show your grandparents' face, you unfilial person.
She sneered.
What a thing to say!
I would have children if I could. But that's not possible for me. Filled with frustration, I looked down. Seeing my distress, she added insult to injury.
Since you're useless because you can't have children, at least be useful to me.
Camilla snapped coldly. Tears welled up, and I was left speechless, so I left the room. I went to my bedroom and cried into my pillow. Yet, I kept telling Camilla every day that it's better for her and the baby if she moved a bit, and to take care of herself. One day, perhaps in a bad mood.
Enough, you're so annoying. Can't you just leave the house? Just come here for Dad's care and the chores.
She blurted out something outrageous.
If you dislike me that much, why don't you go back home?
To which she replied,
Going back home would just increase my workload. What do you think I'm here for? You're the housekeeper, just listen to what I say and keep quiet.
Camilla said, mocking me. Realizing it was a waste of time, I started preparing for work. While I worked, Camilla lounged on the sofa, eating snacks and watching TV. I debated telling Andrew about the situation but didn't want to drag him into a sibling quarrel. Camilla puts on a good front in front of Andrew, so it probably looks like we're living harmoniously. While I was hanging laundry, "How long are you planning to stay here?" Camilla suddenly asked. "I have to take care of Dad. I can't just leave," I said while hanging the clothes.
It's going to be a problem if you don't leave. The baby is coming soon. You need to free up your room for us.
My husband and I were using the bedroom that Richard used to occupy. This room is the largest in the house. That's impossible. I refused, and she just said, okay, and backed off easily. The next day, while I was working, Camilla, usually lazing on the sofa, seemed to be up to something. Busy with work, I didn't pay much attention until I went to my room and was shocked. The long-running manga I had collected since childhood, and the accessories and clothes I bought as a reward for myself upon employment, were all gone. Instead, the floor was covered with baby items. I rushed down the stairs and confronted Camilla relaxing in the living room.
Camilla, where did you put the stuff from my room? It was in the way, so I sold it. If you're not leaving, we need the space. Your room is going to be the baby's room. I cleaned it up for you, so you should be thankful," she said nonchalantly, showing no sign of remorse. It's unacceptable to sell someone's belongings without permission. Bring them back now. I'm usually calm, but I couldn't remain so this time. Each item was filled with memories and treasured by me. Why are you so angry? You always say to move if I can, so I did while I could. There's no money left, just give up, she said, disinterestedly shifting her gaze back to the TV. Among the items Camilla sold was the engagement ring Andrew had given me. I insisted she buy it back, but she claimed she had no money and went back to her room. I told Andrew about everything that had happened so far, including today's incident, and apologized for the engagement ring being sold. Andrew was shocked to hear the story but immediately went to buy back the ring, and thankfully, we were able to retrieve it.
Since then, I started paying more attention to Camilla's actions. I noticed that Camilla goes out a lot for someone who is pregnant. She lazes around during the day, but leaves in the evening and often returns late at night or in the morning. I hadn't worried about it before since Camilla has always been more active at night, but I wondered what she could be doing while pregnant. I discussed it with Richard and Andrew, and we decided to investigate her actions. One day, I secretly followed Camilla, who had dressed up and left the house. She walked confidently, as if she knew exactly where she was going, and entered a busy downtown area. She stopped in front of a hotel and waited for someone. A man arrived, and it was clear he wasn't William. I had suspected something, but seeing them enter the hotel arm in arm confirmed my fears. I immediately contacted William. When I told him about Camilla's affair, he was shocked, having thought she had come back home early for the birth, but he quickly hired a detective agency to investigate. William reported the investigation results to us while Camilla was out. The investigation confirmed Camilla's affair. Moreover, from conversations between Camilla and her lover, Johnny, it was revealed that the child Camilla was carrying was Johnny's. Hearing the report, Richard turned pale and, in tears, "William, my foolish daughter has done something terrible. She's ruined her life. I don't know how I can ever make amends." He apologized to William.
Richard, please don't apologize. I'm angry at Camilla, not at you. We may be family, but we are different people. It's my fault for not seeing her true nature.
Camilla betraying such a man of character was beyond foolish. We agreed to gather on Saturday when Camilla would be home, and then we adjourned. Saturday. The sound of the front door opening echoed.
I'm sorry for intruding.
William appeared in the living room.
William, you didn't say you were coming today. What's up? The baby's gotten quite big, hasn't it?
Camilla, rubbing her belly, smiled and spoke to William, oblivious that he knew everything.
Camilla, is the child in your belly really mine?
William asked Camilla without changing his expression.
What are you saying? Are you accusing me of cheating?
Camilla angrily retorted to William's words.
Camilla, I know everything. The child is Johnny's, isn't it? I had a detective agency investigate, so lying is pointless. I can't continue a marriage with someone who cheats. Let's get a divorce.
William spoke calmly and matter-of-factly. Camilla, panicking, tried to pretend she knew nothing.
William, what are you talking about? The child in my belly is yours. We're not getting a divorce.
Camilla denied it, but William placed the photos from the detective agency of Johnny and her on the table.
Can you still say you haven't cheated after seeing these?
Camilla looked shocked at the photos, but claimed,
It's not what it looks like. He was just giving me advice. It's terrible you would doubt me.
There's no need for hotel meetings for advice, I retorted, frustrated by Camilla's refusal to admit her affair.
So, how do you explain this?
William played an audio recording obtained by the detective agency.
Camilla, your belly has gotten quite big.
Yes, it's because it's your child. It's going to be adorable.
He doesn't know it's my child, does he?
Don't worry, William is clueless.
I married him for his money anyway. I want to raise your child without any financial troubles, so it had to be someone wealthy.
William stopped the recording there.
Too bad I found out, he said.
Camilla's face turned pale. Upon hearing the audio for the first time, Richard, with his face flushed red and shaking with anger.
Camilla, do you not have a conscience? All you think about is using people. It's high time you learn some shame,
he exclaimed. Perhaps realizing there was no way out, she defiantly retorted.
It's my child, no matter who the father is. It will be Dad's first grandchild regardless, so what's the problem? I'm going to have this child and raise it here.
Unable to contain my anger at Camilla's defiant outburst.
Camilla! How much trouble do you have to cause Dad before you're satisfied? Do you have any idea how much you've made him suffer because of you?
I yelled louder than I ever have before. Camilla turned to me.
A useless person who can't even have children has no right to speak. Dad would be happier living with me, who can show him a grandchild's face, than with an unfilial person like you.
And she laughed triumphantly as if she had one.
What did you say? I exploded. Jealous because Dad pays more attention to me, right? Always playing the perfect student, but now you're the inferior one because you can't have children. The baby chose me, not you, so you should leave this house. What do you know, Camilla? How much do you think I've suffered because of you? Both of you, stop. Camilla, I don't care about the grandchild, just leave.
Richard intervened. Camilla looked stunned by Richard's demand.
Eh? Dad, why do I have to leave? It should be her. Camilla, I'm done cleaning up your messes. I can't deal with this anymore. I don't care about seeing the grandchild, just leave within a week.
Camilla couldn't accept Richard's words. That's cruel. Dad, are we not family? And with that, she began to cry.
You only think about yourself, acting out of self-interest. You've belittled Johanna and now betrayed William. You might want my inheritance, but I've decided to leave most of it to Johanna, who has sincerely taken care of me and kept our home together.
Richard declared this in front of everyone. Soon after, William added,
Camilla, please sign here. I'll be filing for divorce immediately after this. And don't forget about the alimony.
Camilla, cornered by everyone, slammed the table.
Is it fun for all of you to gang up on me? What's wrong with loving someone I truly care about? I've always loved Johnny. You should be grateful that a dull man like you got to marry me and was about to have a family.
She yelled.
Is that all you have to say? Then sign quickly.
William remained calm throughout. He no longer seemed to regard Camilla as a fellow human. His look was akin to observing an animal.
If you divorce me, you'll never find another wife, William. Don't come regretting it later.
Camilla angrily signed the divorce papers and threw them at William. William filed the papers immediately, and they became strangers. The next day, just to be sure, a DNA test was conducted to confirm if the baby really was Johnny's. The test scientifically proved the baby wasn't William's, and when Richard told Camilla to leave, "Why should I be the one to leave? Shouldn't the failure over there leave?" Camilla lashed out. Having no place to go after being kicked out, Camilla went to Johnny's, only to run into his wife. A confrontation ensued, leading to Johnny's divorce. Camilla, playing the tragic heroine denied true love, happily remarried the man she truly loved, and gave birth to a healthy baby. Johnny, who had entered into a marriage of convenience due to his failing family business, lost his financial support and assets. Previously a nominal president at his wife's company, Johnny couldn't find work anywhere and resorted to part-time jobs to scrape by. Camilla and Johnny, living in a cheap apartment with shared toilets and no bath, struggled with living expenses due to alimony payments to Johnny's ex-wife and William. Constant financial stress led to frequent arguments, and despite wanting a divorce, neither could afford to leave, resulting in a loveless marriage. Where did their true love go? Camilla struggled daily with odd jobs, part-time work, childcare, and household chores. Unaccustomed to housework, the home was always a mess. Camilla, who had always lived lavishly on others' money, now wore old clothes and an apron, a stark contrast to her former stylish self. Despite their hardships, both put effort into parenting. I returned to a peaceful life, taking care of Richard. I occasionally keep in touch with William, who I worried might become distrustful of women. However, he reconnected with his first love at a reunion and is now in a serious relationship. The day William told me he had a girlfriend, I received another piece of joyful news. Our continued fertility treatments were successful, and we were expecting a child. Actually, twins. We shared the news with Richard, and now the three of us eagerly await the arrival of our babies. In the dim light of the evening, inside the room, the doorbell rang. I wiped the tears streaming down my cheeks and looked toward the entrance. My mother-in-law Anna and my sister-in-law Sophia stood side by side.
Oh, they've come to help.
I hurried towards the entrance. Opening the door, I was stunned.
Come on, please. Bring them in.
Anna's voice directed people who appeared to be movers.
Excuse us, we're coming in.
And they entered the house.
What? Wait, what's going on?
Hearing my bewildered voice, my son Noah, who was in his room upstairs, hurried down the stairs.
What's happening, Mom?
Noah asked, watching the movers bustling around.
Well,
I turned back to Noah, confused, when Anna and Sophia spoke up.
We're taking my son's house. You guys need to leave. Yeah, that's right. Get out now.
Meanwhile, my father-in-law John efficiently directed the movers, and the boxes were carried into the living room as well as the other rooms one after another. Suddenly, Noah, his face turning pale, exclaimed,
No, you can't do that. Don't you know, aunties?
His face was ghostly pale.
This house isn't Dad's anymore, and it's haunted.
John turned around, and the movers stopped in their tracks. Catching everyone's attention, Noah shook with a tremor. My name is Emma, 41 years old. My husband, Liam, was a 42-year-old company employee. He had a calm nature and doesn't indulge in alcohol, smoking, or gambling. He worked diligently every day for our family. Liam's hobby was watching movies with me on weekends. Until last year, our son Noah used to join us, but since starting middle school, he preferred spending weekends with his friends over us. While I felt a bit lonely, Liam seemed to find it endearing. He fondly recalled not following his parents' advice to go to a prestigious school, his time as a class representative and student council president, and talked about his high school best friend.
Jackson was your best friend, right? You've always been a top student, haven't you?
I teased. Liam laughed.
If my parents heard that, they'd be outraged.
Squinting his eyes while reminiscing. Still, I had a great time in school. He murmured.
Are you having fun now?
I asked while watching a rented DVD at home.
Yeah, I am.
Liam answered simply. Then, looking around the living room. No. He corrected himself.
It's more than fun. It's happiness. We chose and bought this house ourselves. I have a kind wife and a healthy son.
His face clearly showing that.
There's nothing more I want.
From the bottom of his heart made me blush.
That's where you say beautiful wife.
I swung my arm in mock frustration, and Liam dodged with a laugh.
All right, all right. I'm happy with my beautiful wife. All I need to do now is work hard to pay off that mortgage.
We were still paying off our home loan. Liam had arranged the loan so that I, a housekeeper, wouldn't need to work. I'm the lucky one to have such a kind husband. I thought to myself, watching the DVD next to Liam. Liam would always say that our married life is happy, but I can't help but think it wasn't quite happy for him back when he was living at his parents' house before we got married. It's apparent to anyone that he didn't get along well with his parents and his sister, Sophia. I heard the whole issue started when Liam didn't attend the high school his parents wanted him to go to. Sophia, who is 2 years older than him, obediently enrolled in the high school chosen by their parents. She went to college and even got a job at a company her parents approved of, just as they wanted. My sister has become incapable of thinking or deciding for herself. According to Liam, that's how it was. It's easy to just do as your parents say, but then you become a person who can't act without their instructions. You lose the ability to adapt to situations and make your own decisions. As expected, once Sophia started working at the company, she couldn't do anything without being told what to do, felt uncomfortable, and quit within a year. Then, her parents quickly arranged her marriage to Harry, my brother-in-law. Even though Liam was there, they made Harry their adopted son-in-law and lived with him. To me, it doesn't make sense to adopt a son-in-law when you already have a capable son like Liam. And it's not like John's family was that wealthy or anything. John was just a regular company employee. I didn't see the need for them to struggle financially to send their kids to a preparatory school. Ah, that's just my mother and father putting on a show, Liam would say. Apparently, there was a wealthy family living nearby, and their daughter was the same age as Sophia. When they were younger, they used to play with the neighborhood kids, but that changed once they started attending preparatory school. Nothing in particular happened between them and that family, but Liam's parents envied that girl and her family. Determined to send their own children to a preparatory school, they saved up diligently and managed to enroll Sophia into one. As a result, their dinners were humble, except for Sophia's luxurious sandwiches, a rather odd dietary life. Not seeing the need for such a struggle, Liam chose to attend a local high school. I think that was the right decision. But his parents were furious, and from that day, their attitude towards Liam noticeably changed. They used to beam with vanity when mentioning the high school Sophia attended. When people would remark, "I bet your son is too," they might have felt embarrassed admitting he went to a local school. But there's no need to dream of a higher standard of living than necessary. The in-laws and Sophia's family of 3 kids lived in a rented house. Not that there's anything wrong with renting, but I do wonder if they could have spent their money more effectively instead of just for appearances. They even went into debt to send Sophia to a preparatory school and college, and they're still paying it off. I could never understand their way of thinking or their sense of money. This also applied to the allowances given to the kids. The difference in the amount given to Sophia's kids and to Noah, our son, was blatantly obvious. It might be a difference in affection for the grandchildren living with them, but I can't help feeling sorry for Noah. It makes me sigh to think that even Noah is affected by this. It seems that they also didn't like the fact that we owned our house. A 2-story single-family home. Our house is bigger than the in-laws. Showing off with a study, huh? This house is too nice for you. They often came over to our place and made such snide remarks. On top of that, they'd make sarcastic comments like, "Look, there's a stain here," or "The flooring is discolored," and so on and so forth. They would also nitpick. "It's not that impressive after all," they would complain. I really don't see the point of them doing that. If they don't like it, they shouldn't come over. According to Liam, they're just jealous. Or so he said. They're envious because they don't have money and we bought a house, even though we're paying a mortgage. Liam laughed, saying it's all because of their strange habit of keeping up appearances. Harry must have been earning a decent salary. John, who was in his 60s, was still working. But their debt repayment was holding them back. "Don't worry about it," Liam said, but Anna and Sophia would come over when Liam or Noah weren't around. Lately, they've been walking around our house freely while I prepare coffee.
"This should be our bedroom. My husband likes this room. This room is spacious. Maybe it could be a study room for the kids?"
They'd exchange such comments with each other.
"What are you doing?"
When I finally let my discomfort show, they just smirked and said,
Oh dear, we were just looking around. Yeah, and you take your sweet time making coffee.
I closed the door of the room they were snooping in and had them return to the living room. When Anna asked for a spare key, I felt a bit scared. I couldn't possibly give a spare key to Anna, who walks around someone else's house uninvited. There's a chance she could enter our house when no one is around and rummage through drawers and closets. I thought it was so selfish of them to ask for a spare key when they treated Liam so poorly.
I'll have to talk to Liam about that.
I dodged the question and had Liam call later to firmly refuse the request.
How could you deny a key to your own parents?
Anna was furious, but unfortunately, it's his parents who are untrustworthy, so it can't be helped.
Anyhow, just come over when either Emma or myself are at home,
Liam said, ending the call. Good health is the most important thing. It's a saying we often hear. At this age, I suddenly felt the weight of those words. Liam was diagnosed with cancer. After feeling unwell in his stomach and getting tested, we were lost for words. Each test revealed more cancer spread throughout his body. The doctor said that without surgery, he only had a few months to live. We had insurance, but it wasn't enough. We had to deal with not only the hospital bills but living expenses and our mortgage too. The happiness we had built fell apart in an instant. I was trembling with fear of losing Liam and the uncertainty of our future. I didn't know what to do and was just scared.
I'll ask my parents for help.
My parents had already passed away. Being an only child, I had no other family to turn to. Okay. I'll go too. We told Liam's parents, Sophia and her husband, about his condition and asked for financial help.
Cancer can be treated pretty easily these days, right?
Sophia didn't seem to grasp the situation. The in-laws were hesitant about giving financial aid, though not as much as Sophia.
I thought I heard you finished paying off your debt a few months ago.
Yeah, we finally managed to.
Please, we will definitely pay you back. Lend us the money for the surgery and hospitalization. The money you were going to spend on my education, lend it to us now. Please. I will work too, please just help us.
We begged, going on our knees and crossing our hands together. No way.
We've only just started being able to afford some luxuries recently. I have insurance that will waive the mortgage if I die. Should that happen, I'll even sell the house to pay back what we borrowed from you. We'll write a memorandum too.
We pleaded again and again. But despite somewhat expecting it, we were devastated when Liam's parents shook their heads, refusing to help.
In that case, why don't you just sell the house now?
Of course, we knew that might be our only option eventually. But if we were to sell it then, we would have to make sure that the money we make can cover hospital bills, treatment costs, and even the rent for a new place for us after subtracting the remaining mortgage. I heard that before we got married, Liam used to send money home to his parents even after he had moved out. It seemed only fair that they could spend a little money for Liam now. No matter how much we pleaded, my in-laws and Sophia's answers didn't change. Liam straightened his back and replied in a flat voice. Understood. That's fine. As we were leaving.
Wait a minute.
Harry caught up with us.
This isn't nearly enough, and I'm embarrassed to say I don't have any savings.
And he handed Liam $1,000. Of course, he wouldn't have savings. He was helping with the debt repayment. Despite their boastful claims of,
we finally paid it off.
It was also thanks to Harry.
I'll try to persuade them again. Please don't lose heart.
We thanked Harry deeply for his kind words.
Thank you. Just the thought is enough. But still, do you have a plan?
Yes.
Like my sister said, we're thinking of selling the house. Really?
I couldn't help but exclaim. Selling the house isn't simple, there are many procedures to go through, and it will take time. There wouldn't be enough time for Liam's hospitalization, which was in a few days. Even if we managed to sell it, we would need to find a new place to live. It's not going to be easy or quick.
Don't worry. I just remembered someone who might be able to help.
Liam said, smiling at me. Liam fought hard with the cancer for 2 years since the diagnosis. Despite being given only a few months to live, we made many happy memories as a family of 3, in and out of the hospital. We had grown distant with my in-laws, but when the doctor said, "He probably can't return home," I contacted them. They visited a few times, but they would just say, "He still looks okay," in a cold manner, and go back home right away. It's as if they were just coming to see how much longer Liam has left. I shook my head, trying to dismiss the thought. Surely not. Contact his family, the doctor said. The time had finally come. I called Anna hastily.
Oh my gosh! I need to hurry. Yes, it's urgent. You must come to his room right away.
Huh? Oh, okay. I'll come if I can. The call ended abruptly, and I returned to Liam and Noah in the hospital room. Only Harry, who came directly from work, and Liam's best friend Jackson showed up. Liam barely opened his eyes, but looked happy to see everyone before closing them for the last time. Harry and Jackson helped with the funeral arrangements. Harry stayed with Liam while Jackson drove Noah and I home so that we could get ready. It was morning when we left the hospital, but the sun had already started to set. We hadn't even cleaned up after breakfast because we had left in a hurry. I turned on the lights in the dim house in the evening. I sat down in the living room and flipped through a photo album. Tears flowed as I looked through it. I wiped the tears falling onto the table and chose a photo of Liam out of all the memorable photos. The doorbell rang. I wiped the tears from my cheeks and looked at the entrance. Anna and Sophia were standing side by side. Oh, they've come to help. Even though they didn't make it in time for Liam's final moments, I hurried to the entrance, thankful they came. But I was stunned when I opened the door.
Come on, bring everything in.
Anna's voice directed people who appeared to be movers.
Excuse us, we're coming in.
And they entered the house.
What? Wait, what's going on?
Hearing my bewildered voice, my son Noah, who was in his room upstairs, hurried down the stairs.
What's happening, Mom?
He asked, watching the movers bustling around. Well, I turned back to Noah, confused, when Anna and Sophia spoke up.
We're taking my son's house. You guys need to leave. Yeah, that's right. Get out now.
Meanwhile, John efficiently directed the movers, and the boxes were carried into the living room as well as the other rooms one after another. Suddenly, Noah, his face turning pale, exclaimed,
No, you can't do that. Don't you know, aunties?
Noah's face was ghostly pale.
This house isn't Dad's anymore, and it's haunted.
John turned around, and the movers stopped in their tracks. Catching everyone's attention, Noah shook with a tremor. In the midst of all this, a figure comes in through the entrance.
What the heck are you doing bringing stuff into my house without permission? Get it out right now.
Everyone jumped up at the sound of Jackson's angry voice, which seemed to echo throughout the house, or rather, the entire neighborhood. The movers began taking the stuff they had just brought in back outside without checking with my in-laws, their customers. Not knowing what to do with the boxes, they just left them on the street in front of the house.
No, my desk!
I heard my nephew's voice and turned to see Harry standing there with his 3 children. The children, seeing their belongings abandoned on the street, made complaints one after another, while Harry asked Sophia.
I came over when I heard about the sudden move, but what's this all about?
Although Harry is usually mild-mannered, he was furious.
What? But Mom said we were moving. What are you talking about? You agreed too.
In the midst of an ugly argument between mother and daughter, Harry coldly declared,
I can't deal with you all anymore. We're getting a divorce. What? Wait, what are you saying?
Harry negotiated directly with the movers to take only his and the children's belongings to his parents' house. Sorry for the trouble at such a difficult time. I'll have them take the kids and our stuff to my parents' place. Without giving Sophia a second glance, Harry and the kids left with the movers. Sophia collapsed crying on the road, and the in-laws stood dumbfounded among the remaining belongings. The neighbors came out to see what was happening, turning the situation into a nightmare.
Can we at least move these inside so they're not in the way?
I nodded at his words.
Yes, that's fine. This is your house, after all. What do you mean?
The in-laws stared at us, confused. This is the truth. The day after being refused financial help by my in-laws 2 years ago, Liam brought home with him a very tough-looking man. That man was Jackson. He ran a real estate business and even gave me his business card. I was told that he was a high school classmate of Liam's. Not only was his face tough-looking, but he had an intimidating vibe, so I couldn't help but imagine that he was involved with shady business. Noah got frightened and clung to me tightly, even though he was already in middle school. I glanced at Liam with concern. Noticing my gaze, Liam tilted his head and then laughed as if he just realized something.
It's okay. Jackson might look scary, but he's a respectable member of society now. Now?
That's when Noah timidly pointed it out. Jackson's eyes widened, and he smacked Liam's head.
Liam!
Liam was ill, for God's sake. I couldn't believe it, but Liam just laughed heartily. Noah looked so pale that I was worried if he was even breathing.
Jackson, you didn't even come to our wedding, even though I sent you an invitation. And you never pay us a visit even though I invite you over.
I suddenly remembered. The name Jackson often came up in Liam's stories about his school days and when he went out drinking. From the stories, he seemed like a good friend, so I never imagined this was the same person. You can see why. My looks scare people, so showing up at your wedding or visiting would just cause trouble.
Is that why you're still single? I'll hit you again.
I could tell from their light banter that this was indeed the Jackson that Liam had been talking about. I couldn't help but chuckle at their conversation. Both stopped and looked at me.
Sorry. It's just that Liam is so excited, like a child. Huh? He's always like this. Jackson. Remember, Noah is here too. A father's dignity is important. Dignity, that's something you've never had. Noah.
Noah's remark lightened the mood. I told Jackson that Liam was really disappointed he didn't come to our wedding and that we want him to visit any time. Thank you. Now, let's move on to business. We don't have the luxury of time. Jackson's demeanor changed suddenly to a serious expression. First, let me look at the condition of the house. Jackson went around checking each room. Once he finished examining the exterior walls and the meter box, he pulled out his laptop and started typing something. After a while, he showed us the screen.
How about this amount for the selling price?
I was taken aback by the amount he proposed. It was higher than what we had paid when we bought it. It's a very generous appraisal, but can we really sell it for this price? It's been about 10 years since we moved in, and there would be no point if it doesn't sell. We hadn't renovated it in years. Like Anna and Sophia said, there are stains here and there. I heard about that from Liam.
They were talking about what they were going to do with each room, right?
Yes. That means they think it's still perfectly habitable. Don't worry, it will sell for this price. Full of confidence, Jackson assured us.
You can trust him.
Liam added. Understood. Please proceed with this price. As I agreed, Jackson quickly spread several documents on the table.
Oh, and we need to find somewhere else to live.
At my words, Jackson responded. Sure. With a smile. He laid out rental agreement papers as well. First, I will buy this house directly. That solves one problem. Then, I'll rent it back to you. There, the second problem is also solved. I was taken aback, but Jackson continued. I'll transfer the money from the sale into your account within a few days. From there, we can pay off the remaining loan. Jackson smiled reassuringly. It was a boyish smile that made his earlier intimidating impression vanish. As we filled out the documents, I noticed the rental fee.
$100.
Both Liam and Noah looked surprised too, peering over the document. Shouldn't it be $1,000? Liam said. It's a typo, right? And as we laughed, it's not a mistake. Jackson said. What? I owe that much to Liam. After a moment of thought. No, you don't. Liam said. But Jackson told me about their high school days. Jackson was a real delinquent back then. He had been in trouble with the police several times and was often in fights which left his mother in tears. One day, his mother, a single mom, was hospitalized. She had fainted from stress and exhaustion. Rushing to the hospital, Jackson was shocked to see how frail and small his mother had become. He realized it was his fault and bawled his eyes out like a child. After that, he changed his ways, stopped getting into fights, and stayed out of trouble with the police. But then one day, a cigarette butt was found on the rooftop of the school building. It caught fire in a nearby dumpster and caused a small blaze. This became a problem at school, and they assumed Jackson, who had a bad reputation, was the culprit. No matter how much he denied it, saying, "It's not me." No one believed him due to his past behavior. He was at risk of being expelled. When his mother burst into tears again, Liam believed in Jackson's innocence. He was the only one who believed in my innocence. He was the student council president at the time. We were in the same class but had never really talked before. Jackson reminisced, saying Liam had protested to the principal, did some investigation among the students, gathered evidence, and found the real culprit. But you had insisted you didn't do it, right? Naturally, I believed him. No way. But thanks to you, I graduated high school and gave back to my mother. I even became the president of a company. That's why Jackson said he owed that much. The three of us, as a family, exchanged glances and gratefully accepted the rent proposal. This was what happened that day 2 years ago. As Noah said, I own this house now and am renting it to this family. If you don't believe me, I'll show you the documents later. Jackson glanced at Noah, then turned back to the in-laws with a smile. However, either family is welcome to rent the house. Shall I offer you a bargain? Jackson smiled at my astonishment. I'll also introduce you to new properties. After the funeral, we moved out of the house and into an apartment Jackson had recommended. Just unpack the bare essentials. We'll probably be able to move back to that house soon. Jackson said with a mischievous smile, and I asked him what made him think so. Noah, curious too, came closer to us. I actually thought about kicking them out that day. But then I changed my mind. Listen, here's the plan. Jackson leaned in, as if sharing a secret with us. 3 days later, we went back to our old home saying, we left a couple of things behind. Under the pretense that we were retrieving them. Anna reluctantly offered snacks when Jackson joined us. How's the new place?
Not bad at all.
John replied contentedly.
Really?
Noah asked.
Yes, really. No noises from the empty stairs? Or in the shower room?
Noah looked around the living room fearfully. Right, Noah said there were ghosts, didn't he?
I don't think Mom knows about it, but ever since Dad got hospitalized, I started to hear strange noises. Once, I saw the hem of a skirt on the stairs, thinking Mom was back, but no one was there. That's ridiculous.
Anna's words were cut off as Noah and Jackson simultaneously looked upstairs. Is there someone on the second floor? That was impossible. Sophia completely lost her vigor after her divorce with Harry was finalized. Although she was silent, she was in the living room.
What? Stop with this nonsense.
I didn't hear anything. Noah and Jackson exchanged glances and hurriedly packed up. That's good to hear. We'll take our leave then. They rushed out of the house and quickly got into the car. The in-laws, who had come to see us off at the entrance, looked frightened. In the car, we burst into laughter. Jackson's plan was to use the lie about ghosts that Noah had made up on the spot.
This is for treating Liam poorly for so long. Where in the world do you find a parent or sister neglecting their dying son and getting ready to move into his house?
I couldn't agree more with the words that Jackson spat out while he was driving. Jackson and Noah played such pranks on them repeatedly. Eventually, it was even said that mysterious incidents that neither of them had even mentioned would occur in that house. The in-laws and Sophia got creeped out, mistaking the noises in the house for poltergeists. They complained to Jackson and Noah, but we never experienced such things.
Jumping to conclusions can be a scary thing,
Noah said, laughing. Eventually, the in-laws and Sophia couldn't stand it anymore and moved out of the house. They rented a place within their budget, introduced by Jackson. That was just business. I made sure to find them a decent, budget-friendly old apartment, Jackson said with a sly smirk, and Noah and I applauded. By the way, Sophia, after divorcing Harry, had to start working again to pay child support. Seems like she's getting a taste of the harshness of society. I wish her all the best now that she has to single-handedly take care of her parents who had looked after her. Eventually, we returned to the house we bought with Liam. Although we couldn't buy it back, we still live there for a rent of $100. Harry and his 3 kids have started to visit again. Sophia seems to be asking for reconciliation, but Harry is not considering it at all. Once a month, Jackson comes over to collect the rent. He times it with Liam's monthly anniversary. After looking at Liam's photo, we have dinner together, and he even listens to Noah's troubles, now a high school student. And Noah and I have a little secret joy. It's the stories about Liam's school days that we hear occasionally at dinner. We hear so many stories that we never knew about, and we learn new things about Liam. I'm sure Liam is smiling with us around the dining table.
No way, come on,
Liam would say, making childish excuses.